welcome to another episode of the Lounge Podcast. Today, have Dawn, Hex, and Kite joining us. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, pretty good, Earthlings.
Cool.
Hi guys, sorry I'm ill this week, so I'm going to sound a bit shit, but I hope you can forgive that.
No worries. Alright, so today, got a topic. I think should be really interesting. It's about diversity in media and just like I think just sort of diversity in media in general, like the representation of diversity in media. I think it was water, so it was Dark's topic, and usually I would have the person who came up with the topic kind of maybe say it off and explain it. Since she's not here, and I know Kat, you have quite a bit to say about it. If you want to, you can start us off and kind of maybe explain it, and then we can get to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So, to kind of go into what Echoes would have wanted to have mentioned. So, representation in media typically refers to the portrayal and the showing of people from different walks of life. It's not necessarily something that's exclusive only to like a racial discussion or a cultural discussion. It can really involve things such as like different lifestyles, potentially cases of people with disabilities, among other things. So the impetus or just the idea of talking about this is just the idea of to shine a light on the concept and what are the merits of it, how it can be portrayed well within stories, and the impact for those represented groups in the perspective of other people who have either never encountered those people or only have like a vague idea of what they might be like if you were to.
So essentially, it's like raising awareness to certain groups people not as aware of, are around, just because I guess in the general populace it's probably not as it's even the culture, because it's not just like disabilities and everything, but it's just different cultures and stuff.
Yeah,
depending on
partly.
Yeah, so,
partly. Because like it can be easy to kind of sum it up within the whole like just on the sense of like if you ever were to meet those people. But it's also a matter of just trying to humanize and just remind everyone that despite the differences that we do have, and there are quite a few differences that we all have, whether it's cultural or just being able to perform certain tasks, we're still united under the human experience. So the idea of representation is to cast a wider view on those disparate walks of life. We're not necessarily separate because of our differences by itself. We simply just have aspects to ourselves that are better understood within a more honest and varied portrayal than a simple one size fits all.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess I can probably touch on like my thoughts on it, because I think at least my general thoughts on it, I don't think it's that too complicated. Probably there's more nuance into when we go to like different topics on it, but like my central thoughts is, I think I might have said this before with other things, where it's just like, well, yeah, we have our differences, and these things is what makes us like unique, and this is what makes, I think, stories interesting as well, because you'll see someone with a different perspective to you. Maybe you relate to him a lot of other things, but you'll see something different, or you see a different perspective. That's part of the reason why I think stories are interesting in general, and I guess making a community is just it's something we do because we're not all the same, and there's something we can benefit from each of us. So I always kind of, when it comes to things like this, I always think about, okay, cool, this person, they're not the same as me, whether they are different gender, different race, different different abilities and everything. But I always kind of start with, at least when it comes to me trying to write a character who's not the same as me, I always start with, okay, what do we have in common? And from there, then work my way down to the differences, because I think the differences is what makes it interesting. But I think to get there in like an honest way is to kind of start with, okay, well, for one, we're human. We bleed, we bleed red. I believe all of us. Last I checked, and we have, most of us have been born from a mother or father. Like, just go through, I guess, the general differences, and then from there, any nuance differences from there, I will kind of start figuring out. Okay, cool. So if the best thing to do is like, okay, well, if I was like this, like if I were to have maybe something that this person has that's make them different in their life, if that were to happen to me, what would that be like? And obviously if you can talk to people like that, obviously bounce your ideas of people like that, or people who know people. It depends on the thing, like a culture. I'm gonna use a culture for example. Like if you were to trying to write another culture, I think first, from what you understand of the differences between you, is to try to like draw what you have in common first, then work your way down, then try to work the person or talk to the person, see what they think about those differences, and then just work from there. I think a lot of it just comes down to being curious about the other side and having an interest in it, because obviously that with writing, because we're talking about this in writing, I think with writing that shows in your writing whether you have an interest in it or not. And sure, maybe it don't have to. Maybe it can just be you have it as you studied it, so you can write it more accurately. It doesn't have to be like a focal point of your story necessarily. But I think just having that curiosity and then using that to try write it in honest way as possible. Because at the end of the day, like no matter like what culture we're from, we all human, and I think there's a lot of things we have in common that will still help bridge the gap, even if there maybe even if what you have is not absolutely perfect. The fact that you try to do it honestly and was actually being open to work out differences and write in an honest way, I think it goes a long way. Beyond that, it really just comes down to craft and just craft and other little nuanced things that I guess we can go into from here. But that's kind of my usually view on it as a whole. If that makes sense.
Sorry, I just wanted to say something. That I think is So I watched a video about something quite recently that's pretty much on this topic. And one thing I thought that was a really I don't want to say it was like profound, but it was profound in the fact that it seems so obvious yet isn't something that would come to mind first. And that it is very easy to represent another group. It's not easy to do it well. And the main reason I would say that I do also agree with that sentiment is because, so I know this, one of the easiest examples to point at is modern day Marvel, because everyone absolutely loves hitting on it. And I'm a bit of a shit stirrer, so I'm going to do the same. And one reason why a lot of people really hate modern day Marvel is because they often tokenize instead of representing. So when I say tokenization, I mean the idea that you are essentially boiling down a group of people and you're using someone to be kind of the best example of a type of person, if that makes sense. So, for example, when we talk about someone who's a tokenized member, one of the probably most well-known stereotypes as a tokenized character is probably the gay best friend archetype, and it's just the idea that you don't actually treat these characters or these people as people, but you treat them as essentially tropes. So part of the reason why a lot of people don't like modern day Marvel is because they tokenize their characters a lot. I think it was a series called Miss Marvel. I think it's got this girl. She's quite young. And I think it didn't finish airing that long ago. Well, I'm saying airing, streaming not long ago. But one of the things they tried to use to promote the material is going like, "Hey, the main character's a girl and she's like Muslim." And while it's awesome that she's a Muslim main character of a Marvel movie, when you make so much of her identity and her character and her personhood linked to being Muslim rather than the fact that she is a woman and she has that dedication to Islam as a religion, because it becomes half of the words out of her mouth is, "Oh, guys, by the way, I'm Muslim," rather than going, "Oh, this is me. I'm Muslim as well, but this is subtext. It should be subtext, not the text that we're reading and what we're hearing.
Yeah.
So I'd say when it comes to representing characters, and especially when you're watching media and you feel like characters aren't being represented well, it's probably because of tokenization, probably because you feel like these characters aren't actually people, but more of stereotypes and ideas of a culture that people are either trying to kind of put up on a pedestal or sit there and basically treat like shit.
ticking boxes, like, hey, we got this, and doesn't do anything further than
Yeah.
that. And and because of that, like, sure, like the general idea of it is awesome, but it's just like by doing it like that, it kind of
You're not doing it well.
them. Yeah, it just dehumanizes them, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. So
I don't know about.
It's very annoying because a lot of people will hear stuff like that, and the first thing they'll do is they'll criticize these characters for being whatever they're being tokenized for, rather than the fact that these characters are tokenizations of things that people represent. Like, for example, I'll use myself as an example. I have a lot of minority statuses, and I really don't care. For me, this is just my reality. I don't wear it on my sleeve. People can see that my skin is dark, but I'm not turning around and screaming down the halls that I'm black all the time, Mainly because I don't need to, but also, But the thing is that when people often write black characters into things, especially when they do it nowadays, a lot of people will turn around and be like, oh, this character's black. And they'd had the most stereotypical ideas of so-called blackness ever instilled onto them, rather than feeling like actual people and actual characters that could exist. So I'm sure you've probably seen this statement before, but stop writing female characters and write characters who are female. It's that same idea.
Yeah. Start with the person first. Start with who they are, and then the product. What they are, instead of putting in front of, oh, I am this. It's like, like not,
we get it.
I think Kat, you was gonna say something.
So I don't really know if it's I wouldn't really use the term dehumanizing, because dehumanizing specifically refers to reducing someone's agency and humanity down to kind of like the worst stereotype, and I don't really think that's something that the MCU does. Me personally, my problems with the MCU, and I don't really want to make my entire aside about the MCU personally, because we'll be here all day if we do that. I think the MCU's problem isn't necessarily the tokenization. I feel the problem really just comes down to the fact that the dialogue is simply bogged down by a lot of terrible post-ironic poisoning that we have seen nowadays. Now, I do want to mention that I personally have not really watched Miss Marvel yet, with Kamala Khan personally. But the little that I have seen of it, though, just the very little I've seen from the clips and among other things, I don't really think we typically get the whole I'm Muslim and call it a day. I just feel like we get more of the irony poisoning more than anything else than simply boiling the character down to a token. However, like I said, this isn't really about the MCU. This really is more about just the merits of why we want to do this properly. So to kind of go on to to kind of assess the tokenized topic, my problem with tokenization in general isn't really just the idea of it or how it ends up coming across. I think my problem is that the term gets thrown around to describe even the slightest of things, even the slightest leaning into a culture. Because characters like Miles Morales get called tokens all the time by the worst actors, when the character in and of himself has always been something of a representative idea of anyone can be Spider-Man. Literally anyone can be Spider-Man. So what we have here is a situation of the term token gets thrown around for characters who are meant to represent a specific kind of idea. So how does this tie into the representation subject? So Miles Morales just so happens to be black, but he also has Hispanic roots. So he's representing two different walks of life at the same time. So he already has, depending on who you ask, two strikes against him when it comes to specific biases. But when I watched Across the Spider-Verse and I read a couple things with Miles Morales in it, the one thing I'm always reminded of is the struggle of Spider-Man is really a universal experience that kind of represents all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever is under the mask is something of little consequence, to the point where Miles could be under there, Peter could be under there, you could be under there yourself, the person listening to this. But the fact remains is we are all united under the struggle of life and the struggle of the human experience. So I feel with representation as it is, I feel that's at the heart of what it should represent. This idea of we are all united under the human spirit. But at the same time, we have struggles that are unique to us, whether we're conscious of it or not. Now, without really getting into the old, systemic conversations and all that, because that is a whole nother can of worms that, again, that we do not have the time to touch right now. But there are specific struggles of different walks of life have to face. Like, for example, some people, when they're walking down the street, some folks might take the other way because they have a negative idea of your race. Or let's say, for example, just to kind of bring my work into this, just a quick question for everyone. How do you think a blind person uses their devices? Like cell phones. Like, how do you think they use them? It's just a quick question.
I mean, I've seen a few accessibility options, but they definitely can be very lacking. So, for example, one person I knew, she had a carer who, because of that carer, basically enabled remote voice control on her phone. She's able to use it, but I know that the accessibility options for especially for complete blindness are pretty shit, to be honest.
Right. So the reason why I brought it up is because when we talk about the representation side of things, I feel this conversation sometimes gets bogged down a lot by, the typical tokenization, like what race are we going to represent? Because it's easy to bring it to that, but there's other walks of life that we sometimes miss on the undertow. And I bring up the whole blind people or visually impaired people into the conversation, primarily because most people might assume that the accessibility features are out there, or they have people who work with them. But how many people actively know on the ground what the situation is like for them? For these people who are actively still trying to live the closest version to an ideal life that they can live, in spite of the impairment that they may have. Like, it's a subject that I feel might get lost in the undertow, or might get lost in the minutia. But as someone who's this is pretty much my job. I work in accessibility every day. And one of the things that we have to learn is how to use these accessibility features ourselves. And the struggle that a lot of us have to go through learning how to do it is nothing compared to what the life is for those who actively have to learn this without being able to see anything. So one good merit to this subject, if you ask me, is just being able to get like a glimpse into what this kind of life is like. And if you ask me, that's what should be at the heart of the subject whenever it comes up. It's probably, of course, it's good to mention when it's done wrong. Don't get me wrong, because like I'm gonna be tearing into stuff in a bit. I just kind of wanna get this off my chest before I forget. Like, the idea is to make sure that we at least have a window of a point of view as to what this life is like. Whether it's not just a cultural thing, but if you're living a life where you can't see, or if you're living a life where where your motor skills are reduced, like, what does that entail for the person who has to live that life? And the responsibility that we have to portray it's something that we really, really have to be honest about, not get bogged down.
Yeah. I
I think
definitely
this
agree.
is a really good point, honestly.
Yeah, there are. I do agree. There are people who are so quick to press the button on. This is clearly this for stuff that are not even clearly not that, and that can muddy the language in terms of what should be what's a good example, what's a bad example. I think part of realizing like what works is looking at, obviously we just say you really like looking at stuff that don't work. It's just being aware, calling that out, saying, hey, that don't work. It don't mean that the people did it had like everyone in the whole in industry who did it are have super malevolent intent and blah blah blah. Because I don't think anyone wakes up and decides to make a bad show. Like it's.
Oh,
I don't think,
definitely not.
like, yeah, there's layers, especially these big, because I think some of the ones I just keep going back to is like it's really big companies and they have a lot of money investment in there, whether for good or ill. That muddies up the creative process. That muddies up, I don't know, just a lot of things, and a lot of things can go wrong in that, and hence we get, I guess, like that bad examples. But like I think by talking about it helps you like put to light like what is a good example, and like you said, like these there are groups that just don't get represented because we're not even, I think, because we don't live that life and we're not aware of it. Then there's not enough people in who are talking about it. I imagine there is media that has done this really well out there, but they're just not as either mainstream, or I haven't seen it, or so it's definitely out there, but it's just a matter of, I think, because there are less people. There are, in general, just going by numbers, there are less people. For example, the example he gave about people who are blind. There are less people who are like that than who ain't. So then it comes down to one, awareness of people who actually want to talk, make a story of it, or bring it to light. And I think that's the reason why it's not as as prominent. But I think beyond that, I think again, I think if the writer if they were interested in it and were to take it and to try to, and just like, again, starting with what they know and just working into differences from there. Yeah, it won't be perfect, but at least it'll be an honest take. I think that is, without getting into obviously all the bad examples, or pointing out, oh, it's this reason or that, because I think that just that's just a whole bag of weeds that just can go on forever. It's just, I think it really just comes down to, I just think it really, like, when it comes to a good example, it just comes down to writing. I think you have to give a damn about the subject to a degree. Maybe it depends how full in front and center it is, but you have to care. So even though there are maybe groups who are like, okay, like maybe say for example companies like, okay, we need to represent this, but then maybe the person, or maybe somewhere down the line, maybe the creative director or something, they haven't done enough research, or even care to do enough research to give it due diligence. That can cause that either to fall apart, or not hit as home as well as it could. So there's a lot of ways it can go wrong. But I think it just with anything when it comes to story, you have to write something that you care about, and then I think I don't know. I don't think you can really. I think there's like a solution to these things beyond just being aware of them, and then if anyone is interested enough to pick it up and make something out of it, let them make something out of it. I think forcing them or to do that, it can be a hit or miss. Maybe the writer's good enough to make it work, regardless, and sometimes it will fall apart, and I think we've seen examples of those too. So I think that's kind of my overall take on it.
So I was just thinking that definitely the idea of like representing people who have either disabilities or conditions that give them completely different like experiences in life is definitely an important thing, and I do think that's an important thing to show in media. My biggest concern about people who like kind of show these things is that often they're painted with a broad brush, and I think this is the main thing I was kind of getting at when I was talking about the idea of like half of the reason why I used the Marvel comparison was because sorry, just before I get onto that, I definitely know there are a lot of really bad actors out there who will turn around and hear representation and believe, oh, this is making it woke or garbage and stuff. I don't agree with that. I think I can't stand those people. They're always the worst.
The
Okay,
pain.
having the amount of times. Okay, so the story I'm writing right now, literally both of my leads are lesbian women. I feel no guilt about it. I've spoken to one person who told me, "Oh, why do you have to make it all woke?" I was like, "This isn't woke. This is my experience. I can write whatever the fuck I want. I don't need your permission to do it." And like people should not be constrained so that they can fit into your perfect worldview. That's not what writing's about.
Because it's
That's
the
not
same.
what art's about.
Because then we loop
It's
back
just
around to the
not.
same. Then we loop back around to the same problem.
Yeah, it's the same
Which is
thing.
hilarious
We're
because it's
upset.
just like, why, like, no one is the default. You can tell me that being straight is the default, but it's not for everyone. And that's the way that the world is. You know, we live in a very interesting and diverse world. We don't need to necessarily. Now, I'm not saying that every author, every writer, every creator needs to turn around and depict our world accurately, because I don't believe in that either. But one thing, part of the reason why I do say these things, and part of the reason why I used the Marvel comparison earlier, was because I think sometimes people often desire to try and speak that they do not know enough about, to speak in a way that is worth listening to. Now,
Exactly, yeah.
I don't believe in the idea that you should never try to represent someone who doesn't reflect anything that you know of, because I think I think it's sad. I don't know what it's like to be a man. It doesn't mean I can't write one. And, you know, if you don't know about a group of people, research them.
Yeah.
You know,
But I
we
think
have so many resources, we have so many opportunities to research and speak to and get to know people who have experiences that are different to yours.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are experiences that you can't get a hand of, okay? There are so many remote tribes in this world who have no communication with the outside world. They don't know the internet exists. They don't even know we're in the 21st century, and they're happy as they are. If you want to depict someone like that, it's going to be very hard, but you can try. I think when it comes to depictions of people who have experiences that are different to yours, yes, one of the best ways to learn about them is to speak to people. But I also think that, honest to God, when you are trying to depict a group of people, do not be afraid of making people flawed. And this is one thing that frustrates me to no end, because it makes characters painfully unrelatable for the rest of us. I am happy to see more black characters on screen. I'm happy to see more Asian characters on screen. I'm happy to see more people who are LGBT on screen, and so on and so forth. But one thing I don't like is when we're all broadly painted with this paintbrush of can do no wrong, or that we can only be good people. There are scumbags out there who fit into groups that are minorities, and it's fine. The thing is, I don't want to read your work and see that only minorities are bad people. That's the problem. I think you don't need to reflect how the real world is in your work, or even in works that you enjoy. But the thing is, there's a certain level of realism that every single work should have, is that everything, every type of person in your world should have the capability to do bad. I shouldn't only see white villains in your stuff. That's weird.
Yeah, there are
I
people
shouldn't
first,
only
you
see
know.
black villains in your stuff. That's weird. I shouldn't only see male villains in your stuff. That's weird. To me, that speaks to an agenda. And maybe that, like, I know that I'm kind of using words that sound like a bit, but it does speak to an agenda to me, because I've seen stuff where the only bad characters in the story, the only characters who were depicted as mildly animalistic, i.e., they had animal features like ears and tails and shit like that. The only characters who had that were characters who weren't white. When I read stories like that, it tells me that the author doesn't really see people who aren't a certain skin tone as, human. And I know that for some people that might sound like a very extreme jump, but I think it's a reasonable assessment to make when you and yourself in your stories, because all your biases do come out in your stories, which is fine. It's just how it is. We're people. Everything we make is flawed just as much as we are. But at the same time, it is very concerning to me when I read a piece of media and they want to depict a group of people, but they are not willing to make that people feel like people. They make us an idea. That's why I was complaining about tokenism. It's not the idea of dehumanization, because it's not really a term I use very often when it comes to characters, because I feel like it's very specific.
Very.
I don't find the depictions of Miss Marvel or any of the other superheroes that have come out recently, or She-Hulk, to be dehumanizing. I find them insulting because they're shallow. I find them insulting because they don't feel like people. I find it easier to relate with the Hulk than She-Hulk because I have had problems controlling my anger. Who hasn't? Everyone's had a moment in their life where they've had to learn how to bite their tongue and move on. That's relatable. Having a woman turn around, sit down, and go, "Oh, I mastered my anger because of all the men I've had to deal with in my life." That's not relatable to me because I fucking hate it when men think that they know better than me. And at the same time, I'm not over that anger yet. And it's not something I could suddenly magically deal with because I was born a woman. This is not relatable to me. This isn't relatable to anyone. She doesn't feel like a person who has struggles. She feels like someone who was basically made perfect, and the problems in her world exist because of the influences outside. A real character has problems caused by influences outside and inside. If one of those, I'm not looking at a character, I'm looking at an idea. And I don't want to see your ideas, I want to see story. I want to see characters. That's why I complain about tokenization. When I complain about tokenization, I complain because I want to see your characters. I don't want to see your little shallow ideas that probably took you 5 minutes on the toilet to think about. This is lazy. This is negligent. You are telling me that you don't see women as people when you can only write women as painfully capable and having no flaws. When you can only write men as being these massive stoic beings who only care for like women and have no personality. You're not giving me a character, you're giving me an idea that you wish existed, and it doesn't. Because people aren't like that. People are nuanced. We are so cool because we are unpredictable. We love that. As writers, as creators, as artists, one thing that we have to hone from day one of doing our art is observation. Observation is your most powerful, always will be. When it comes to representing people, you learn to represent through observation. When you learn to draw, one of the things they tell you is, what shape can you see? Draw a general shape, then get closer and closer to what you can observe. The same applies in writing. If I meet someone else, I see this, let's say I meet some guy, right? And I don't know anything about him. I'm going to learn more about him by talking to him. And I'm getting a more and more accurate picture as I talk to him more. The same principle applies. That's why people don't like tokenization. They don't like feeling like they're being talked down to. And when you tell me, "Oh, yeah, I'm this perfect person," or "this girl is so cool," or "this girl," or even making like little jabs at like old stereotypes, like, yeah, it can be funny the first like 3 times you do it. After the third time, people aren't laughing with you. They're staring at you and waiting for you to stop talking. Like, I don't know. I have gone in a little bit of a circle in what I've been saying, but essentially, in very short bullet points, let's just say this. When you're writing characters and you haven't had experience with a set of people, try to talk to them if you can. If you can't talk to them directly, honestly, look on the internet. If you don't know what certain people act like, look into the forums that people interact with. Trust me, they will show you a lot more than you'll be ready to realize. One of the easiest ways that I found to find out about like people I haven't interacted with really very much is by looking at how they interact with each other from a third person point of view. Yes, your biases will inform some of that, and that is okay. Like, you can sort that out another
it's almost
time.
inevitable. So
you
Exactly. It's completely inevitable, and that's
everybody's got
fine.
one.
You can sort out your biases later. Right now, you're trying to learn about these people. Learn
Exactly.
about these people.
I mean, because
Try to write down things about them. See behaviors, see cultures, see attitudes, see the way that they act, observe, use your eye, like, your mental eye to do it. and you will realize how much better you'll become at representing people and how much better you'll become at noticing when representation isn't good. Why Miles Morales is such a good representation is because he feels like a real teenage boy. He feels like a teenage boy who interacts with his culture. Yes, he's black, but that's not his whole self. That's just an aspect.
Definitely, just a
Yes,
part of
he's
it.
Hispanic. Once again, just an aspect. It's not his whole character. Yes, it informs a lot about him, but he is still him in spite of those traits. If you took away one of those traits, he wouldn't be the same person, but he is still a character.
Yeah,
That's the important part.
He's not
That's
defined.
why we complain about this stuff.
He's not defined from that. He's defined through that.
Which is
Exactly
exactly what the Spider-Man mantle is supposed to represent. It represents the fact that we are all united under this banner called the human spirit. I mean, yeah, we have all of these aspects about us, but the fundamental reality is, like Don mentioned, a one-size-fits-all method just doesn't work for humanity in general. It never will. Because the problem is, this is what inevitably leads to the subject of tokenization as we're discussing it. Like, I'm sure most people want to do right by minorities and and people within the LGBTQ community by trying to portray them as as softball as possible. But I've always despised this primarily because we're fundamentally robbing people of the ability if we simply put them within this ideal box of being a perfect minority. It's something that I personally feel is just as destructive as if someone treats you like you're the play. Because the thing is, the moment you step out of line with being a perfect portrayal of anything, that's when you start to get a lot of crap on your back. And I don't think it's fair for anyone. Because if you ask me, the tokenization subject, as much as I wanted to avoid it, I feel like we can more than delve into it at this point, since we don't got to worry about the typical tropes with the conversation. Not around here, anyway. The reason why tokenization has another dangerous aspect to it, as far as representation goes, is that it simply drains and robs that human experience from us, because it's not exactly 100% a pure thing. Because humanity is made up of several different layers. We can get angry. We can hate people. We drag each other through the mud every single day. But we're also capable of equal parts kindness, love, and adoration. So if we try to portray a specific portion or a specific person as a ideal, we're never going to understand the human that's underneath it. And I've seen this happen before. Like when I was playing The Last of Us Part 2, I was sharing the game with my friends, and there was a specific section that we got to that got a lot of controversy. It's when there's a certain boss fight in the game where you're fighting one of the cultists. He happens to be a black guy, and he's trying to kill you. And one friend of mine was like, "Oh wow, I can't believe it. They're trying to be diverse and inclusive, and yet they have this crazy black guy trying to kill you." And my response to that was, yes.
That's just that's the way it is, isn't it? Like
it is. Like I wouldn't have even thought about it until you brought it up. And the reason why I find it interesting that you brought it up is that you seem to think that just because they're trying to be inclusive, this means that they need to treat us with kid gloves. No, they do not.
Oh my god! That's exactly how it feels. It's like they turn around. They don't even treat like people. They're like, oh, sorry. Are you okay? Are you capable of thinking for yourself? Are you guys always have to be good? Like we have to coddle you like literal children. I hate that shit.
I mean, it got me so tilted, but I decided to be professional about it because my mom was home at the time and I didn't want to start screaming. So it turned into this. It turned into a matter of, well, here's the thing. You need to think about something. This man is living in a cult where these guys have very specific beliefs. And as far as they're concerned, you are a non-believer. You can be black, you can be white, you can be Hispanic, you can be whatever. But if you are in a cult, your race does not matter. You are united under the banner of religious fanaticism and madness at that point. So they don't even care what you are. If anything, here's the irony. The cult is more accepting than you are.
Literally, yeah. That's what it is.
Like the cult is
Oh.
more like no, seriously, really
It's true.
think about
Nah,
that.
that's just how it is. Yeah, facts.
The cult,
No, that is actually insane when you say it like that.
yeah, the cult is more accepting of other races than you are because the cult at least admits or at least acknowledges that there are people out there that they have to fundamentally stand against. Now, I fundamentally do not like the cult that's in this game at all. I do not like them because not only are they so steeped in traditional values to the point where it is actually self-destructive, but they are actively trying to kill you and a kid that you're trying to protect. So, but the thing is, what makes the cult the more tolerant of the two is that they have already accepted where they are in life to the point where they do not necessarily see race. They simply see the ability to communicate and interact with other people. You apparently have seemed to fail that lesson, which is why you seem to think that this black person trying to kill you is a strike against the writers of the game when it's not. The Last of Us Part 2 has a lot of problems, but that boss fight is not one of them.
And given like the kind of narrative that's The Last of Us is covering about, like, you know, the state of humanity after, you know, an apocalyptic situation, it's kind of ironic that they are more open and then you closed minded in that regard. Is pretty ironic.
It's very ironic because, like, and like Don says, another problem that we have, of course, is to make sure that whoever we're portraying is like automatically a badass and can do no wrong. And like I mentioned before, what we have at that point is not a character who we can call even human at that point. What we now have is just an idea, just a character that can pretty much do everything. That's not a character or a person anymore.
Like a chirp at that point. It's just
exactly. And I want to pass the microphone over soon. I just want to kind of mention this to kind of plant the seeds. The reason why a lot of people got angry with Rey within Star Wars, to kind of just ignore the typical crowd as far as a Star Wars subject is concerned, my reason for getting angry with her and why a lot of other people didn't really enjoy her nearly as much wasn't simply the fact that she could do all of this. It was mainly because they hardly, if ever, gave the time to zoom in on Rey as a human being.
Yeah.
That was always my problem with the sequel trilogy. I don't mind that Rey can do all of these crazy things because the fact of the matter is Luke Skywalker did the same crazy stuff she did and no one complained about it then. My reason for complaining about Rey within this section is that we have chosen to strip down badass female characters to just the ability to just supersede and just overcome. When instead what we should be doing is, what are they like on a personal level? What are they like on a grounded level? Because that's what happened with Luke. Rey never got her moment to be a human to the audience. She never got that moment. And as soon as Rise of Skywalker came around, it was very hard for me to get invested in the character when we thought she was going over to the dark side, because I already know that she's going to be okay. This girl has like no darkness in her heart. I am not convinced.
They haven't showed any moment where it felt like she was being tested or had to prove herself to the task. It didn't feel like she was struggling against anything. So
definitely not.
When they did that, I felt, well, really, it's not really gonna happen. So, yeah.
What we need to do in this case, and this will be my last point before I pass the mic. What we need to do here is, if you want to portray a woman as strong, if you want to portray or even a man as strong, or any person from any walk of life as strong, you need to remind us of what they have going on inside. What are they fighting against? Like, they're not just fighting against the world. They got to be fighting against their own instincts on top of that. If you do not give us that chance to be invested in that banner, in that struggle, what you end up having is a situation of, you see, you can do that too. And that's fine to tell a child that they can do anything. That's great. That's There's a
time and place, definitely. Yeah.
There's a time and place for that, where we have to let a child know what they are capable of. But if we are trying to tell a serious story, and you as the writer, it is your job to make sure that we can at least hold on to something. If I, as the viewer, I'm seeing you behind the scenes intentionally writing this character to come across as a specific way because you want to represent people in a specific manner, if you lose a humanity, what exactly are you representing? You're not representing a person anymore. You were simply representing an idea.
Yeah, an idea at most, yeah. And just, And yeah, especially in this kind of story, if your story's gonna like, it's gonna be some deep dark story, and then it's just this character ideals with no real struggles, it kind of falls flat, definitely. I do have like a kind of question, because I've thought thinking about this before, and it just kind of touching upon regards. I won't go into deep, specific examples of bad examples of this, because I think we have a bunch on our heads already. But I feel like with some of them, because I always feel like none of these are necessarily made with like, we're going to mess up this franchise, ha ha ha. It's gonna be
definitely
great,
not.
You know? Like investors don't want that. They want money. Yeah, sure, they want money, but they don't want if they could make this the greatest thing since the sliced bread, if they could tap into that consistently, they would, but they don't. So my thoughts on it is like, do you think a lot of these shows that we get now that come off really bland is due to, I think, higher powers probably trying to have a say in how things should go, because they think it will reach the most people, because I think you're trying to relate to the more people as possible, you have a risk of being unrelated to everyone. But also, do you think it's like a, how do you call it, like a response to what they have seen in media before? Like they probably watched shows before and think, there's a lot more, you know, like, there's a lot more of this in here, so we need to it's overreaction. That was it. It's a overcorrection. Yeah, I feel like. Do you feel like it's overcorrection when we see a lot of these nowadays?
Let Don go first. I have a take, but let Don go first. So I can I can add to it.
I think it is and it isn't. Because I think it is in terms of the fact that they can see that other people are profiting off essentially overcorrecting, so that they believe that they can also like profit off it. Because I don't think that a lot of these entities are doing this so that they can essentially go, look guys, we care about these people too. I think it's in a similar vein to how a lot of companies treat Pride Month, for example. For them, it's not about pride, it's about lining their pockets more. And if you can line your pockets more by putting a rainbow on your label, on your logo, that's what some companies will do.
Yeah.
They don't earnestly care about the causes that they're rallying behind. They do it to line their pockets more. And I think it's kind of the same principle with like the new, the characters nowadays, with characters often wearing their identities as labels, especially because, unfortunately, in recent times, people are sometimes a bit too eager to label themselves with certain things, and some people become so absorbed in the labels they ascribe to themselves that they essentially, instead of becoming descriptive labels, they become prescriptive labels. Yeah, it's like when people sit there and they see that they have a certain identity and they're like, so I have to act a certain way now. I'm sure every black person's heard this before, but the idea of someone being able to act too white, for example, it's kind of like that.
Hi, that's me.
The idea that we've all gotten the good old Oreo insult and all of that shit before.
The pain.
It's just the idea, literally, worst shit ever. Yeah. But it's just the idea that people get to a certain point where they're so eager. Often it's such a tribal mentality to give yourself a label, so you have a group to belong to. So you'll end up labeling yourself. Oh, hi. You'll end up kind of labeling yourself. And you'll label yourself so that you fit in with a group of people, but then you need to let everyone else know that you're also part of that group of people. So you'll start picking up behaviors and attitudes to make yourself feel more part of this tribal group, so that you can't be lost. And I think that a lot of the media that's so-called overcorrecting, which I wouldn't even give them that courtesy, because they really don't deserve it. But the idea of people who are overcorrecting for it, it's often because they don't want to make people feel unincluded, or they want to be able to go, hey, look, we all have our own in-joke, nudge, nudge, wink, wink,
hey,
sort of thing.
Hello, sorry. Didn't mean to disturb anyone talking.
No, you're good. Sorry about that, Don. Go on.
That was basically it's just the idea that I think a lot of the time with media nowadays, and like people talking about, media is too woke and whatever bullshit, nonsense they're saying nowadays. A lot of the reason why we have media which feels very stilted and kind of inhuman is because people are more in the interest of lining their own pockets than representing any group.
Yeah.
So this is just a matter of, unfortunately, you're looking to the wrong places for representation. These people don't care about representing you. They don't care about making people seem like you or anything about you as an individual. What they care about is the money in your pocket. And if turning around and appealing to you being black, white, Asian, female, male, LGBT, straight, whatever identity or label you fit into does that, that's what they're going to do. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll chime in. Also, hey, no, welcome aboard. Now it's a party.
This is a big one.
Full house, man.
So here's what I want to respond with. Do I think this is an overcorrection? Like Don said, this is a bit of a yes and a no. Yes, in the sense that I can acknowledge that within the 90s cartoon scene, that one of the things that we had going for the US at the time is that a lot of those old cartoons really wanted to really have a diverse cast, like, like the Captain Planets, that sort of deal, like the Burger King Kids Club, or depending on who you ask, maybe Magic School Bus, maybe. That I'm going to put an asterisk right next to that because I don't think that's egregious. But the thing is, there was this little notion that anytime a minority was portrayed in anything, they would always come across as just the general sum of their parts based on our perceptions of them. So because of that, you ended up having tokens. I mean, this is where Token from South Park comes from. This is in response to that perception. So because of that, those stereotypical ideas that we may have had, which we can even take this back a little bit further. We can go back to like the 1960s and how indigenous people were portrayed within cowboy movies. Like, we can take this back even further with maybe like one of the first motion pictures was a Ku Klux Klan movie. We can go farther back on this and we would still come back with the same answer. Yes, minorities have not always been portrayed properly within American or Western media. This is not something that we can avoid. We know this is true. So yes, in a sense, due to that in some part, depending on who's doing it, you could see this as wanting to kind of reconcile with America's past. And I find that admirable in its own way, personally, because the fact of the matter is, even though, yes, we have some really nasty examples that we've been mouthing off on for a while, but the inherent idea of at least trying to ensure that everyone is on an equal playing field, I feel that's admirable. I think that's something that we should pursue, and then allow these kind of stories to exist. So, in that sense, yes, some of these failures are as a result of an overcorrection. But here's where I think it isn't. The problem, where the thing is about it not being an overcorrection, comes from the simple fact of capitalism as we know it. A lot of this is going to come down to also chasing trends, because whether you're on Wattpad, whether you're on Twitter, whether or not you're on Tumblr, this is a very hot button subject to get into nowadays. And I'm a proponent of diversity, as I've already made clear many times before. So this is my market. This is the stuff that I like. But the reason why I can also mention this isn't necessarily a overcorrection is because there are some people who are coming into this not from the perspective that I mentioned. There are people who are going to do this because they know it's going to rope them a lot of attention. And this is going to bring them like to the top of the New York sellers list, whether we like it or not. People will do this because they know it sells. Which is unfortunate, because when you get into this is where a lot of the cynicism starts to come in. This is where all the cynicism and the distrust towards representation and diversity starts to come into play, because we know that these bad actors are going to be doing this, and then when this happens, there is a negative perception on the topic when there doesn't have to be. But people, unfortunately, do not know how to make a differentiation between what is simply a result of a poor product, or just or maybe just all representation is bad and woke, blah blah blah. What we end up having is an indirect chilling effect, where people want to tell these stories, but they are fundamentally intimidated by how much money is going into it, to the point where the original meaning for all of this passion, starts to get thrown into question, because now we have to wonder, is this coming from a place of sincerity? And if you ask me, if I could be completely honest, I feel like a lot of this does come from a place of sincerity, whether people want to admit it or not. The problem is just that when the corporate suits and corporate interests get involved, that's where things start. That's where the line starts to get blurred. But what I'm really trying to say with my point here is, even with all of that in mind, I don't think we should shy away from the topic at all. Because at the end of the day, even if this isn't about reconciling, even if this isn't about wanting to overcorrect or not correct at all, being able to have these different kind of stories out there is more of a net benefit than a net negative. Because being able to at least understand the walk of life from someone who's asexual, trans, black, Chinese, living in a specific place or a specific setting, what we have to remember is that the fundamental worth of a human soul comes down to the stories that they can also tell. And simply looking at it with skepticism, just right off the bat, it's just it doesn't do humanity any favors.
Yeah, it kind of shuts down the whole conversation from there. If that's all you're looking at it
Indeed.
from. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that because it's definitely a mix of like what you said. Because also I like to imagine with these things as well. Like even with the companies who go about things wrong, it's like these companies, especially the ones we're talking about, they're usually really big companies, and they're to make money, they have to try to reach the broadest audience as possible, and that kind of means make everything inclusive and make everything right for everyone. So if they could do that perfectly, they would. But then there's that the closer you get to try and make something for everyone, the closer you get from making something for no one. And then to course correct, it's a big ship. Like these companies talk about, they're really big ships. So to course correct just takes a longer time than it would like for people who are watching it saying, well, that was bad. Why are you doing 3 more of these? So yeah, as much as I'm checking out, well, with the example of like the MCU because of what's going on, I understand that it's the product of just the company is so big anyways. It has so much moving pieces, so many things going on, that you can't just go in there. One person can't just go in there and fix it because it's a really top down issue. It goes very deep because of that.
And ironically, I would say, let me just mention this last part because we probably should get an idea of who's gonna go next after me. I do want to mention this much though. There is one thing that the MCU has managed to at least do with some degree of sincerity that I can't really find it in myself to give them too much trouble for. I feel they at least did a good job with both the Black Panther movies that we did get. I'm not saying they're perfect by any means, but there's a reason why that was as big as it was. It's not as though it was the first case of a black superhero. Far from it. We've had plenty of black superheroes. That's not the point. What really was happening, however, is that it was an event for a lot of people. This kind of thing isn't just like a capitalist venture. This means things to people. So even if it may come across as a little bit vapid to just go and see a movie just because there's a black main character in it, the fact of the matter is, whether we admit it or not, we see ourselves in characters, and sometimes and the characters themselves don't have to look like us. That's not a requirement. But the fact of the matter is, T'Challa managed to reach people in a way in which they've never experienced before. And because of him managing to reach people like that, that's what got people to watch the movie. And the same thing applies to the Little Mermaids live action. And you know how I feel about that movie. I wish it didn't exist. However, I should mention that while the movie wasn't for me, it was for the kids. And sometimes just having a character that at least reminds you of you or someone that you love is enough to get you in to watch the movie or at least care. Now, whether or not that movie is good or not, that is going to be up to the people to decide. That is subjective as all hell. I'm not here to tell you what is great, what is bad, or whatever. However, what I am telling you is people will find something to latch onto when it comes to stories. And sometimes if it's just as basic as how a character looks or where their background is, I don't think it's inherently invalidating. If nothing else, I think the fact that we even have that ability in the first place, at the very least, can tap into some quarters of empathy that I know we all have.
Mm.
It's just a matter of whether or not fundamentally it manages to reach other people.
Yeah, it's kind of like finding the flavor for the person and whether they kind of connect to that or not, more so than others. And teach their own sort of in that regard. I definitely agree with that. Also, I was gonna say, which is kind of along the lines you were saying, but more for me personally as a writer, looking at like this stuff. I think the good thing about this, despite my grievances, is we having this conversation. I don't think I'll be having this conversation about this if it was if there was no attempt like that like they had, and I don't think this subject will be as I guess in the forefront of I guess the general public, but more so I say writers, because I know that we'll probably think about this a lot more just generally just by the product that we write. I don't think it'll be in the front of my mind as much if it wasn't done in a way where I'm like, why are they not doing it right? I got to think about this more. So I can at very least say I'm grateful for that, because it helps me think more about it and think about how I can make sure I'm
Yeah.
fall into the same pitfalls. So yeah, that's kind of my take. Yeah, if anyone else want to go next,
Me.
I do know. Yeah, you want
I like to go.
Yeah, go for it.
But yeah, yeah, because just why I came in a bit late. Sorry, because yeah, I was sleeping. But anyway, but
Don't worry about it.
regardless, why I came in also was because Nate reminded me, thank you, that this was actually the topic I originally suggested. I forgot why. It's been a very long time. But I do think it's an important topic because I think representation in media is so important, because more often than not, I think a lot of people feel like they're not represented in media, whether it's for people who are in minorities, people who are LGBT+, people who have more fringe interests. In a way, it's sort of things that tend to diverge from, I guess, the overarching society at times, for better or worse. But two things came to mind, at least I wanted to talk about. Was the first thing is that just in general in Asian and Japanese media as well, I think it tends to be quite homogeneous, depending on the environment you're in. Japan especially is so. That people who are foreigners to them, stand out especially well. And that can also lead to a lot of discrimination, racism, or even just in a way, just feeling like you're an outsider. Even if you were born in Japan, half Japanese, or essentially we're in Japan your entire life, but don't look Japanese, essentially. It kind of creates an environment where you feel like you're not going to be accepted, even if you try your very, very hardest to integrate yourself into the culture. And that's a very common feeling where I think for minorities especially, where like, for example, even at like my company, for example, I'm like the only Asian person in my department, or at least Eastern Asian, at least very specifically. But and also when I went to my company in the office and stuff, probably prominently white for the most part. That's just how it can be sometimes, but I personally don't really care too much. But it's something that I do notice, having in college kind of put myself in Asian focused spaces. Kind of like a comforting thing. But why I want to talk about Japanese culture was because I want to bring up one of my favorite mangaka, who is Shirahama Sensei. She is the mangaka of Witch Hat Atelier. Why she's kind of interesting is because she's one of the most outspoken Japanese people I've ever seen online, where she talks directly with fans. But what's predominant more with her is that she actually puts quite a bit of care in portraying different, people of different body types a bit more than usual. Not like heavily so, but it's noticeable that people can question whether she's actually like Japanese sometimes because of that. Like, because of the fact that her character's all not, predominantly, Asian looking or whatever. But because of that, it could also be because she actually has strong Western influences, as she's actually a big like American comics fan, and has done a lot of like comic art or just interested in Western media in general. Even is very much pro-Palestine regarding the war efforts, or regarding the current conflict going on, to a detriment of being ridiculed by other people. But I feel like I kind of wish that what she does is just more commonplace, but it also kind of shows that depending on the environment and what you truly care about, that is often reflected in your work.
True.
For better or for worse. And I still find myself wanting a bit more representation that way. A feeling like I'm like represented in media, whether maybe it's because I'm a minority, or maybe it's because I want to see people who deal with like depression or mental illnesses a bit more, even if there's a societal stigma against that. And then the second thing I want to talk about as well is regarding Genshin. Did we talk about this before yet, or
I don't think
no?
we have. Definitely not on stream podcast. I don't
No.
think we have.
Okay. So, I'll just bring a controversy regarding Genshin is, when Sumeru was released, there's a controversy over dark-skinned characters not being dark enough, or that certain characters like Nilo were fetishized with their character designs to kind of be more akin to a stereotype rather than authentic clothing. I'm not really gonna say much regarding like design wise, because I'm not really can't really judge exactly, as I don't know the exact design process. But I do agree that in general in Asia there's a stigma against darker skin. It's often seen as barbaric, as much as I wish I could say otherwise. But there is that stigma, which is why a lot of Asian people tend to actually try to go lighter or try to avoid being the sun or being tan. And I think because of that is why Genshin doesn't go full out with darker skinned characters, like maybe in comparison to like Gundam, for example, which tend to have also more diverse casts than typical Japanese media, perhaps because influence from the West as well. But I do hope that maybe someday we'll have more truly darker skinned characters in Genshin. But as I think there's one character in Zenless Zone Zero.
Yeah, apparently I will see, but the next area might have more, but we'll see. I mean, but I definitely get what you're saying.
Have to
We'll
see.
probably talk more about it later, but yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. But,
yeah, because it was like a huge like controversy online. It was like, why is like it's this shade when you could do this and this shade or that type of thing, right?
Yeah,
but it is sadly it's darker skin is part of an Asian stigma.
Yeah, especially
so that's why like it's not something that they can do often or as easily, just because of it will make them lose money.
Yeah, it's definitely I definitely feel a mix of that, but also because I'm just kind of, because I heard a bit about this more recently, because I played the game, I probably checked some like lore stuff, and I just kind of caught it there. I haven't really checked like the fans' take on stuff too hard, but recently I've definitely heard about this. And I'm just thinking, like, when I thought back on it, I thought like more of the people who are because in Simeru there's two parts. There's the desert, and there's people who live in the desert, and then there's like King Deseret's people, and then there's like, the Ruka Devata's people. And the Ruka Devata's people, Ruka Devata's people, they come from like it's more greenery. So I guess you could say it's less hot there. And in King Deseret's place, it's more desert. And I think at least the NPCs, and there's probably a few characters who come exclusively from there. They are more dark, like Kate. Is it what's her name? What's her name? The one who's kind of controversial. The one who was kind of controversial for her kit because it wasn't that good. She has really good character design. I think it's one of my favorite character design.
Nilo? No, not Nilo. It was
the bodyguard. The bodyguard.
Yeah, Dea,
and what's her name? The other one who can do like, she has like a shield and sword, a spear.
Oh, Candace.
Yeah, and they both come from the King Desert side, and they are dark. They're of darker tone, so it's more. So I see the separation. Like, it seems like the people in the desert, because they are more dark, and then the people who are like the Ruka Devata's people, they are more light tone, but they come from an environment that doesn't seem as hot as the desert. So in my head, I didn't see it as like a direct. There could be, I imagine there could be definitely some part of that in there, but I didn't see it as big as a deal as I've been hearing about, because it didn't come across to me like that until I heard some of that. But then again, I just think about the characters that were in the desert. They are darker. I think even even the one who judges. I'm so bad at names, but I bet he's from I think he
Sino.
does. Sino. He's from the desert as well, isn't he? And he's darker tone.
Best boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in my head, I honestly feel it might. Correct, you could correct me wrong, and it could be the case, because I do agree that and I'll get into this with Asian culture, which is I think both interesting, but then has these problems you're speaking about. Is at least with the game, I don't think it's a problem, or at least as sinister as I've been hearing, because there are clearly been darker skinned colors characters, but they are from the desert, and the people who are not from the desert just haven't really been like that. And even NPCs match that. So I think they represent the culture pretty well, if anything. But yeah, it's interesting saying about Asian culture, and I agree. I think what is with speaking of the Japanese culture, they are very, very to themselves. Like if I was to like give them like the sort of introverted, extroverted spectrum, they definitely more introverted as a people. Like they kind of keep to themselves. They keep that, and they kind of stick with the people who they kind of know. And I think it comes with this is not to me to say that they are fine how they are. I think everyone, as people in every culture, and even as yourself, there's always things you can improve in. There are blind spots in the culture, or as yourself, the things you can improve on. But I do feel like through them being more inclusive and more introverted, they come up with some, like, I think might be hard to reason why I connect so much to their stories, because I think I'm pretty introverted. I like my stories pretty deep, and having more than just being a quick little getaway from like the day. I like my story to be quite deep, and I feel like maybe the reason why I fell into anime so hard is because they, like, you really feel like you're stepping into someone else's world. They just kind of sat and made up, like, and I don't feel like I get much of that from Western media. I think maybe TV shows would probably help bridge that gap more so nowadays. But I do feel definitely it's part of that is that allure to it, and why I find it connects to me so much is because they as a culture are more to themselves, and that kind of their whatever things they go through their lives, because of that they're able to express in ways which it connects to me, who lives all the way in I don't even live in Japan. But yeah, then on the other end of that, there are the cases where they see people, foreigners, as outsiders, and they don't really connect with them. It takes a very long time, or it's very hard to connect with them, or it's, yeah, like I said, you'll be treated more likely to be treated as an outsider. And yeah, there could be people who are like even cold to you, or even be like rude to you because you're different. But
Nate, just to bother you, but it's kind of hard to hear you a bit.
Oh, okay.
I think you're like cutting in and out.
It's cutting in and out.
Connection is.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me see. Might change the connection. Is it? How often is that happening?
There's a bit of a massive delay.
There we go.
I think
Now
it's
we
better
got it.
now.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll talk about if it. Oh no.
I think.
Yeah, I think Dawn, I think if Nate is not talking, maybe you could continue.
1 second. Sorry.
Okay.
What happened to your signal? It just sounded like really off or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, my thing cut off for a second. I'm back. I'm going to quickly change my connection to something else because. But 1 moment. Yeah, sorry about this.
No, you probably if you wanted to chime in real quick, you can. Otherwise, I think it's Dawn's turn to talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
There was just something I wanted to say about something that you guys had mentioned earlier. But like,
Okay.
are you guys
Okay.
alright with
Yeah. No.
now?
Yeah.
Or...
You go. You go ahead. Yeah. That's fine. You go.
Yeah, you can go down.
Okay. Basically, what I was gonna say is that part of what we were talking about earlier, because I think some of you guys missed it, we were talking about tokenization and stuff earlier on, and how there are people who use the term incorrectly, i.e., they'll use it to describe anything that they believe is woke. I'm sure we've all heard that term before. Yeah, not so great. Taking like psychic damage from hearing that shit. Anyway, so one thing I was gonna say is that a big reason as to why no, sorry, just for then. One thing I find that's quite ironically sad about so-called woke media nowadays is that it is painfully exclusive in its inclusivity. So
Oh,
while it
clever.
appears, thank you, while it appears to be very inclusive with how they kind of try to center people's identities in aspects of themselves, i.e., someone being promoted as a black superhero as opposed to a superhero who is black. While they do these things, there are certain stories that they absolutely will never give the chance to tell. So the example I'll use is what you call it, The Owl House and Steven Universe. Both of these stories faced a lot of controversy when they were still coming out because of the fact that they had main characters or important characters who were very visibly and openly LGBT. And you would think that in a world where we promote material and we say, oh, it's really amazing that these characters are whatever identity or whatever sex or whatever, race, and we're promoting these ideas, but there are certain things that they will never promote or they don't want to promote or they're a lot less willing to, mainly because, as you guys mentioned earlier, it hurts a lot of big companies' bottom dollar. The reality is that these companies are not here to represent us. They do not care for us being minorities. They don't care if we're black. They don't care if we're Asian. They don't care if we're white. They don't care if we're Hispanic or any other racial group. They do not care. What they care about is if they can sell their things to large groups of people. Any moment in a Disney film that can be misconstrued as LGBT or pro-LGBT will simply be cut from worldwide releases. This is a well-known practice in the film industry, and in any media, to be honest. It is upsetting when we see these things, and I do say it mainly from an LGBT perspective, but hell, even from a racial perspective. In Black Panther, the poster in the US had Chadwick Boseman's face front and center because whoop-de-doo, he was the main character. But in the Chinese release, they put a mask on him because they knew that
Yeah, I was literally
Chinese
about to say China.
audiences
Yeah.
would be less willing to watch a film that has a black main character. And it's not because necessarily that Chinese audiences are racist. It's the fact that when you live in a country which is fundamentally far more homogeneous than most of the Western world, it is going to be difficult for you to see certain characters as front and center over people who look like you. And the thing is that while I do think that diversity and inclusion and representation is very important, of course it is, I think it is just very upsetting when people turn around and talk about these companies having earnest representations and wanting to do good things for people, when in reality, these people only care about profit. They own, that little, I think there was a moment where two women kiss each other in that Buzz Lightyear movie. It was cut from every single release that wasn't in the US or the UK or Canada, or Australia, sorry. But these things are not done earnestly. How many times have you heard of Disney having its first openly gay character before? There's a reason why this terminology is used over and over again. It is used to sell tickets to get seats in theaters filled out.
Which
Earnest
incidentally,
representation is often drowned out by the same corporations that use it to promote their own materials.
true.
Disney will turn around and tell you look, we have our first LGBT character on screen, while also shutting down loads of creative projects that have LGBT characters front and center. And the same goes for every other minority group as well. For every single time they turn around and they talk about Miss Marvel being an amazing series because the main character is Muslim, they will also shut down projects that have Muslim main characters. These people are dishonest. I don't want to turn around and say representation is not good. It is necessary, okay? It is not something that should be branded as good or bad. It is a necessary thing that will exist as long as people from different backgrounds exist, okay? As long as there are individuals, there will be conflict. As long as there are different people, there will be difference. And as long as there is difference, there is diversity. That is the reality of human experience. I think that when we look for people who can diversify and show different experiences, one of the things we need to do as a community and as a group of people who want to see more of that is we need to look to people who are individuals. We need to look to indie projects. We can't be relying on large corporations to do this lifting for us because they aren't interested. They want to line their pockets. We want to fulfill ourselves. If we want to fulfill ourselves, we need to invest in smaller creators who have something to show for it. So I think in the cases where people are upset about characters who, maybe their skin tones were lightened for adaptations, which has happened before, or hell, even for situations of race swaps, which I did actually want to ask you guys about, which I'll ask the question straight after I'm done with this. But anyway, yeah, I'm sure that will get a lot of controversial takes.
So yeah, sure. Yeah.
I have a take on that. That
Yeah,
might get some,
I will ask you guys about that in a moment.
some
But
people are gonna
in
get
these
mad.
situations where we have these things all happen, I think a lot of the reason why these conversations always end up being very heated and very angry is the fact that a lot of these people who apparently care about representation use it as a way to push their own agenda. And I know that I said this earlier, I know as well, but I know that this language is used by people who are bad actors, but I say it because it's important. There are people out there who deliberately point out any type of diversity as an agenda. Some of them will say it because they believe that some people shouldn't even be in the same country as them. Some people will say it because they believe that everyone should be different and there shouldn't be any um like homogenous society or anything being represented. I disagree with both, but I'm definitely leaning more to one than the other. I'm sure you can figure out which one. But anyway, before I continue, the question I want to pose to you is this, because obviously the race swap thing has been very relevant in the last few years, especially when we look at things like, all of I think the Disney live action remakes are probably the biggest examples with things like the Snow White movie and stuff like that. And obviously, as you said before, the Little Mermaid. So my question to you is this: how do you guys feel about race swaps? And do you believe that race swaps are a good or effective way to deal with diversity, i.e., do you think it is a good way to represent a minority by race swapping them? And I leave that question to any of you.
I think that race swapping, in my opinion, just seems like a very cheap way of representation, honestly. And the reason
Can
why
I
I
ask you
think
to
that way,
elaborate on that?
the elaboration is that race swapping, it's kind of like you're taking something that is pre-existent and you're just swapping it with a different race, and you expect people to kind of like go with this and not question it at all, if that makes sense.
I can see where you're going.
Because the way I see it, it's kind of like, why can't you create something unique and original yourself? Why do you need to take something that already exists, swap out the character with a black one, and then call it a day? And that's somehow supposed to represent something? I mean, I understand that what you're trying to say, that there's no difference between a character, let's say, for example, but is that really the best way to do representation, honestly, in my opinion? I think that's kind of, in my opinion, just a very cheap way of representing people of any kind.
Yeah, I think,
in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I think honestly, it depends. Again, with these things, there's layers to it, so context is important. Like, it depends on the story, the character, and the relevance of that character being whatever race they were. And again, with these, especially when they come to like, because I think a lot of these happen more nowadays with the big companies, and like you said, let's be honest, most of them it's either done because they don't care, or it's done because they want to get brownie points. So most of the time it becomes a bit flat. But beyond that, beyond that, it really just comes down to what changes because of it. And if it's just like, oh, okay, this character, they have this vibe, they have this sort of attitude and blah, blah, blah. And that gets perfectly represented with a character who's not the exact same race, or even sex, because sometimes they do, I've noticed they do both sometimes. Some of the examples I have, they've changed the race and the sex. And
I'd like to. I'm sorry. I thought you can finish first because I also
okay.
want to add my 2 cents.
Yeah. So I feel like if it doesn't change like the overall arc or the feel of the story, then it's fine. But it honestly, it really depends, because again, like you said, there are stories where it does that, and in my head it's like, okay, you changed this character, but then because of what they change, they feel that nothing else changes around it to actually make it fit, and it's like, well, then if you wanted to have a character of a different race hair, why didn't you make a story that actually will fit that character more than just changing the race hair? It does feel it's a little bit cheap and a bit lazy in some instances. And I think some of the worst cases where when they do it, in my head it's just like, oh, what like. Again, it depends on the story, but the worst cases where it's like, what you're trying to say, what you basically trying to say is, oh, this role, like, it's, it only can be like this role of the character, you're changing the race, but but how it feels like when they're doing it always feels like, oh, it's like almost like comparing that original character, like, oh, the only way this character could be relevant is by making them change, by making them have the role of the previous character who was maybe the example white and that stuff. So I think some of them it does come across as it does come across a bit lazy. But there are cases where it doesn't seem to, like, the portrayal of that character comes out so well and fine. I look at the character for like, okay, you chose this guy because they're good at portraying that character, and it didn't matter, and because of their role in the story, it didn't really matter what race they were necessarily. But there are some cases where I'm like, yeah, well, it wouldn't just be better if you just made an original story with a different race character, because then now we just have this in my head comparing them to the original character, and now you haven't even done that well. So now I'm just wondering, why do you do that? The change didn't even feel like they were fitting that role. It just felt like you kind of did it to, either because you didn't care and you didn't like look into what effect that'll have on the story, or you're just trying to get brownie points. So yeah, so it really depends.
Can I like? I'd like
Go,
to.
Bell.
Sorry. Okay, so I actually want to echo Nate's, Dawn's, and No's points using 2 examples. I mean, to like express my stance.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if you guys are familiar with this version of Cinderella starring Brandy.
Yes, I grew up with that one.
Yeah, and the thing is, I loved that movie. Like the first time I saw it. In fact, I even kind of preferred it over the OG Disney Cinderella because Brandy was such a charming main character, and Whitney Houston's there, the fairy grandmother and stuff like that. And the thing is, if you look at it on paper, the story is the same. It sort of follows the same aesthetic as Disney, where Cinderella has like a silvery blue ball gown, and it follows the same classic story. But you have a main character as a person of color. And the thing is, that story was told in a very, that movie was told in a very charming way that you end up loving the character, and at the same time, you have yourself uh, a POC character that that represents, like, it's a show of representation that doesn't that balances a good a good storytelling, a charming character, with the fact that she is a POC. Now, what how come I loved that but hated The Little Mermaid, you know? And echoing what Dawn said, intent matters, when it comes to telling the stories. And it is also for that same reason that when it comes to, like, my stance on it is I'm not too bothered by race swaps, provided that there is heart. Like, like, how do I put this? Like, I'm
You can
convinced.
tell they're being picked because they are the best actor for this role. I think that's
Yeah,
really what sort of
it's
going on.
No,
it's
not
not
Okay.
necessarily.
necessarily.
Okay,
Because
cool, cool.
I love Haley. The thing is, the contradiction here is I love Haley Bailey. I like her, but I didn't like.
Didn't like her Storm, right?
I really did try to like that movie, but
Mm.
even when I tried to watch it, it was
Oh,
just
sorry, Ariel. My bad.
yeah. I
my bad.
love Haley Bailey, the actress, the singer. I didn't like like the because I mean, the Ariel was my favorite Disney princess growing up, but it wasn't the issue wasn't because they race swapped.
Mm.
The issue was because I could tell that it really felt like how do I put this, like,
It felt like a cash grab. Do you
Yeah,
think? Do you
yeah,
feel
like
like
a
the
cash
movie
yeah.
didn't have
grab.
any passion behind it?
Yeah,
This
Mm.
it's the
and
same
the fact
cynical
that
grind, basically. Same
and
cynical
the
grind that
fact
we've been
that
complaining about.
Yeah, and the fact that they really tried to sell this story where, oh, the producer cried when she auditioned, like, hear it once, I'm like, aw, and then hear it over and over again, I'm like, huh, really? And, like,
Yeah.
uh,
It
I,
starts to
I started to
change.
question. I started to question the if this is a really a genuine thing, or if it's just one way for them to market the thing. And yeah, and I feel like intent that does matter when it comes to, like, like, what do you call this, it really comes down to there needs to be, like, a healthy balance between representation and telling a good story. And I also kind of want to offer my 2 cents as someone who lives in Asia, and an Asian who living in a Southeast Asian country. Because the way that representation in media is perceived here, kind of like what Dark mentioned, about certain cultures being homogenous. This is more of a general view. This is not uh the ultimate absolute truth, but this is based on how I observe my culture, like here in the Philippines, for example. Like, how do I put it? We are kind of like we have had some Western influence because of American colonialization back in, back pre like back post World War II or something, and because of the history surrounding our culture and whatnot, there is a very, how do you put this, um there's a bit of like a tension in the way that representation is showed on media, especially if it has what has Western influence. So when you mean by representation, when I look at representation in especially in Western media, their version of representation is representation according to the West. But then we perceive representation differently. And one thing that I can use as an example, I guess, is the way that some of me and a couple of peers here in the Philippines felt when Raya the Last Dragon was released. Like it was such a in social media here in the Philippines, on Facebook, for example, art communities were so excited about the fact that, oh, we're having a Disney princess who's based in Southeast Asia, and the look of it and the feel of it and the martial arts, the aesthetics are all based in a lot of Southeast and East Asian cultures, folklore, um martial art, etc., etc. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm one of the people who was so excited by it. But the moment that the movie came out, all I felt was couldn't even describe how I
There's a
felt.
reason no one talks about that movie anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it was such a, how do I put it? It was beautiful aesthetically, but from a storytelling standpoint, and you know, it
From a storytelling
well,
standpoint, it came very Western.
yeah, there was a lot left to be like discussed. Like there were certain messages that were just it's something that you wouldn't teach your own kid, you know. You wouldn't teach a kid to blindly trust someone who betrayed you, and let alone gaslight you into thinking that it's your fault why that you got betrayed, because
It's
that's kind of the message that I got from Raya, you know, from the but it's not just that. I can understand that there may have been production constraints, considering it was produced during the pandemic, you know, everyone was working from home. But the fact of the matter is, like, sometimes when like media from the West presents something like this, like, hey, you know, diversity, etc., I'm not opposed to that. However, as someone living here outside of what, you know, people are kind of, it's either they're super on board with it, or there's this general distrust of, oh no, here's America again trying to plant ideas in our heads. Like, and the thing is, we kind of suffered from these ideals being introduced to us, and unfortunately these has also garnered harmful reactions towards progress. And I cannot blame them. People's feelings about this are quite valid as well, because sometimes, like, oh, media claims to represent me, but their version of being a Filipino is not the authentic Filipino experience. And then when we try to tell them this, they're like, oh, you're gatekeeping your culture from us. I'm Filipino
Oh my
too.
god.
I'm
Oh lord.
not.
I hate that nonsense, man. Oh, I gotta
This is
take
why
on
I
that
told you
immediately.
this is a really big question. I told you
Yeah,
this was a big topic.
Oh my
yeah.
god. I gotta
Honestly,
take on that in
I
a
was just
minute.
gonna say, can you like actually elaborate on the gatekeeping your culture thing, because I think that that's actually a really good point. I
Mm,
find
I
that a lot
actually
of
want to, yeah, I want to
people
tell
do
you
The,
guys
that.
about it because it's a funny story, and
the
it's
thing
very
about like
prevalent Gen
the
Z
thing about the
TikTok. Actually.
gatekeeping
Uh,
stories is, well, the gatekeeping of like cultures is just that a lot of the times trees have different ways of life,
yeah,
and you have an
I agree with
outsider who tries to
that.
imitate those ways of life, but not in the way that it was supposed to um, imitate this life, this culture, in a perspective from their lens. It sounds almost some like, for a person who is like this minority group, probably say this is insulting, and some would even say to a much even higher extreme would say this is propaganda. because they're trying to
Mm-mm.
trying to impress this group into thinking their way, into having their way of thinking.
Mhm.
No, and it's one thing. I think it's one thing if it's done because I think no matter what, we are never going to fully 100% represent someone. But if it was done in earnest and you're actually trying, then even if they made a mistake, I would say, okay, at least they tried. At least they actually honestly tried to represent something, and they probably didn't do the due diligence. Whatever it is, whatever perspective, maybe whatever it is, so long as it's done in earnest. But it's one thing where it's done in earnest, but if it's another thing where it's it was done where it's just kind of like they didn't do the due diligence to actually represent what they're trying to represent properly, or in a way that's earnest. I think there is a line between that, because there are acts there, the people who do it and they just obviously they'll try, and then there's people who just oh yeah, you guys, okay, I know how to represent you. Here you go, and it's almost kind of haphazard thing. If anything, it's more vision of what they expect you to be if they were trying to even go that far. And yeah, it just comes out of a heap of mess, really. Yeah.
A life example I now also give is what I've experienced. Was where I come from Eastern Europe. We have a very large Russian minority group. One of my life experiences was that one of my friends, that was a long time ago, went to Russia for chances of better life and opportunity, but unfortunately for him, he was kind of ridiculed in a way, because the reason why he was ridiculed is because they didn't really see him as a Russian, but like a Western Russian, if that makes sense. So the thing about this culture thing is that they try to imitate the culture of another country, but they kind of fall flat because it doesn't actually represent this culture, if that makes sense. Because this culture is completely different to the culture of somewhere else. Like, let's say, for example, if you're an American, personally, I would call you an American because you are an American. You live in America, and I wouldn't really call you African. You're not in Africa, So, and the logic there is simply because those two are born in a completely generation in a completely different way of life, completely different culture. Those two are not the same, So, well, historically it may be related, but historically that's all there is, culture-wise, and their beliefs and their, way of life is completely different things. So that's how I kind of interpret it. And the issue that I have with representation is that it sometimes tends to be very shoehorned, very brute forced, if that makes sense. And if you're trying to represent, you have to be very careful how you plan to do it, because there's a chance you might actually fall flat and will become a laughingstock, or you might actually end up offending the group you're trying to appease. That's kind of I mean, if somebody were to make a movie about, it is a movie and the main character is Eastern European, I'm like, okay, why should I care about that? I don't genuinely, that to me that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, that's not enough to get you to relate to the character. You need to actually share the human experience.
Yeah, if anything, there's a chance I might actually not watch it because of that.
You probably had a bad history or something like that, and that might shut you off. You need to see more.
How do I describe it? It's kind of just seems like, I don't know. It just kind of gives that vibe that you're trying to represent something that is supposed to be representing of me, but it doesn't really feel like me. If that makes sense. And I'm like, no, yeah, it's it doesn't really work that well, in my opinion. And what is it? It's a tricky topic to discuss, and of course with the process of falling flat with representation, and then you also have in a political sense, you also rile up the other group, but that's something completely.
That's another layer to that, but yeah.
But it's usually a chain reaction to these things, and of course the intent wasn't that, but it tends to end up with that.
Guys,
So,
I just wanted to ask because obviously you were talking a lot about the idea of insulting a group and falling flat or making it feel forced. How would you remedy that issue? Like, how would you improve that? Because obviously it's a criticism that we can throw at things, but a criticism isn't useful when there's no solution.
Can I want to answer that as well as the other question that you
Yeah, go ahead.
earlier. All right, so my take on race swapping is might be a little weird depending on who you ask. I kind of see it as a bit of a neutral entity, if that makes any sense. I'll kind of explain why. I should kind of preface this much though. It's not my preferred way of doing things. I personally don't enjoy it myself. But I think there is something of a situation where it could probably skirt by. So I'll give a quick example real quick. The most common example that most people can point to nowadays is Nick Fury. Whenever they say Nick Fury, the first thing that comes
Yeah,
to mind
that's a
is
good one.
the first thing that comes to mind is Sam Jackson. Most people, that's what most people see nowadays. Nick Fury was white within the comics, but once Sam Jackson got around to playing him, or at least when they did the animated Avengers special a couple years ago, the role was taken over by Sam Jackson. Now it's to the point where we don't even think about it. Now, depending on who you ask, you could see that as just a very cynical race swap, but the difference is what we have here is a character, an archetype, basically. Nick Fury plays a very specific role within the MCU, or not just the MCU, but just Marvel in general. So the idea of him being a of him being a black person is not much of a stretch when you think about it, because Nick Fury himself isn't necessarily tied to his race. He simply has a role to play, and it just so happens that a specific actor is playing the character, or at the very least, you have now changed the background so that now he is a black man. Another example that we can, of course, point to is Lois Lane in My Adventures of Superman. Lois, within the newer series, is now an Asian character when she's usually portrayed as a white woman within most of her portrayals. So I think one way to kind of get around the problem with race swapping is when we acknowledge that the character has a much bigger role than simply how they look. Because
Yes.
Lois Lane, and I'm so happy that you mentioned Cinderella Belle, because I grew up with that movie, so I have a personal attachment to it too. It's a really good flick. Because, like, we've had this before. We see this within Broadway productions when minority actors are cast within traditionally white roles. Like, we see this in The Wiz with Michael Jackson. We see this with Morrison in Devil May Cry. You might not know who Morrison is, but he was a character that appeared in the anime who was a white guy. He was a broker for Dante's Jobs. However, when you play Devil May Cry 5, he's actually a black man. This might come across as weird to those who watched the anime beforehand. However, when you think about it, the role of Morrison could be pretty much played by anyone. It doesn't necessarily need to be exclusively a white person. It could be a black man. However, that is where my positive examples of this are probably going to end. Because I do need to mention the elephant in the room, because all the points that you mentioned, that everyone mentioned just now, were valid. The reason why we turn up our nose on race swapping is because of this idea of this can pass as representation when it shouldn't. Because the thing is, when a character's role is much bigger than the skin tone they play, anyone can become this character. And as controversial as this is to say, I believe this can apply to James Bond as well. I believe anyone can be James Bond, because James Bond has never been one consistent nationality. We have had an Irish person playing James Bond. We've had an American play James Bond. In this sense, anyone can be James Bond, because the title of Bond in 007 is simply a title. But the problem that we have when we come to this conversation is because we know for sure why this is being done. And as cynical as it sounds, and as much as it might sound that I might be betraying my own mindset here, it is very much leaning in towards basic do-nothing representation that doesn't fundamentally advance any group. What you end up doing inadvertently is that you end up alienating the install base. And then what ends up happening is the people who can enjoy these changes, like myself, I happen to enjoy it when April O'Neil gets new designs. But the problem is, the moment that April O'Neil becomes black, that's when the controversy starts. My thing is that April O'Neil is a character that is bigger than her role at this point. She's way bigger than that, but I can't blame people for getting angry, because when you're in this climate when characters are getting swapped to different races, to either for representation or just characters that may not have not necessarily gotten to that role within their meta, it gets people angry, and it's justified. It can be justified to a point. If you're not necessarily going full on racist, I can totally get the frustration. Now, to kind of answer the question that Don had as far as how do you work hard to not offend these people, this is where I feel this question becomes very difficult to answer. No matter how hard you work, no matter how hard you try, you cannot be in this business long enough without offending at least somebody out there. It is very difficult to avoid trying not to offend people, because the issue is that's when you start to get works that are very, very milquetoast, that do not offer anything meaningful. This is when you start to get a lot of the work that is extremely safe. This is when you go back to the conversation I had earlier, when you start to cast someone as an ideal minority, or this is the best version of that person that we have, when we know that person cannot possibly exist. But we do this because we do not want to offend a specific group of people. We are trying so hard to stay within the line that we end up not creating a character. Exactly. So I feel, however, if we really wanted to work hard with not offending anyone, if we really wanted to push that and really wanted to make that a point, here's what I think the best method is at this point. Simply portray them as, like Don always mentioned earlier, simply portray them as humanely as possible. Now, they may just so happen to be Russian, they may just happen to be Jamaican, they may just happen to be Vietnamese, they may happen to be from
But
South
that shouldn't be
Korea.
the focus on the story. That's the thing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. What needs to happen is we need to remind everyone at the end of the day that while we may come from different areas on this big blue rock we call home, we are still fundamentally human beings at the end of the day. And what is ironic is that I did use Captain Planet earlier as an example. I did mention that that may have been part of the overcorrection that a lot of people tend to do. But what is interesting about Captain Planet is you had all of these different characters like Kwan from South Africa and Lena from the Soviet Union. You had all of these people, but yet we don't necessarily just remember them from where they're from. We still remember them as individual characters. And while the writing might not have been the best depending on who you ask, fundamentally, I feel ideally that's kind of what we should still go for, to remind us that yes, these people are from these different corners of the world, and they do have their unique flavors because of that. But at the same time, we still don't forget who they are in the moment as people. So if we want to dodge this problem of offending anyone, it's simply to portray them as honestly as we can. Now, but this is another pitfall. Sometimes how we portray people is limited by how we understand them from our perception and our biases, and we cannot separate ourselves from our biases. So because of that, what you are likely going to end up getting is a very quote-unquote Americanized or westernized idea of how this character is portrayed. But here's what I have noticed whenever I talk to people about this, or from my perspective as a Jamaican. I'm going to use Cool Runnings as an example. Most of the people who were in Cool Runnings were not Jamaican. They weren't. But you want to know what, though? That didn't stop my mom and a bunch of other Jamaicans from loving that movie to pieces. Yeah, they still shot in Jamaicans, and they were still Jamaicans there. But most of the main cast were not natively born. But it's not a problem. Do you know why? Because our culture and our spirit was still portrayed within the film. So even though it wasn't 100% within the bloodline, what we got at the end of the day was still a beautiful dramatization of the Jamaican bobsled team. So what we ended up having was still a very human story at the end of the day. So the best way to avoid this, if you ask me, just tell a human story. It may be westernized, it may be or easternized, or whatever nice we want to call it, depending on what perspective we have. But as long as people are able to see the humanity in these characters, and as long as their intentions are portrayed either through subtitles or their original language, we can still find something to hold on to. I mean, we watch anime all the time, people. I mean, most of us here do not understand Japanese, but that doesn't stop us from being able to understand or feel these characters. Hell, exactly. So the best way to go about this is, well, as weeby as it sounds, I guess just do what anime does. do what anime does. Just
Yeah.
do what anime does, I guess.
Classic advice.
So
Yeah.
thing I wanted to add.
Who was
It's like
just okay, Barbie. You wanna go next? No.
Who-
Okay.
Who goes next?
some stuff.
I can go next.
Um,
No, let's see. Honestly, I think not too different from what I said before. I just feel like when it comes, it's not too different from what you basically be saying, Kai. Where it's just a matter of start with the human when it comes to like representing certain characters. Like, sure, we are the nuance and differences is what makes us different, and that's awesome. But like, if you want to be able to, if you want to be able to write that in an earnest way, and write that in a way we connect to other people, you're gonna have to start from seeing these people, seeing other people as people, and then working from there. And yeah, I think that's the overall thing. And then also there was something else I was gonna say. It was about yeah, I think and also beyond that, I guess this is more of an out. I don't think it's really an issue, but it's like a thing of, so long as other people are free to write, what they genuinely like writing. If there is no like, I think this is more of an issue with like bigger companies. The bigger the company you're writing for, in an example, then the more likely there's going to be people up breathing up on your neck on trying to keep things as general and as safe as possible. Because, well, as sad it is, they run on money, and they're trying to keep their investments and that stuff working as much as possible. So you're going it's just kind of nature of the beast, especially the bigger it gets. So barring that, because unless you're working for some like big company, it's just treat the people you're representing, just writing to people,
Exactly.
and yeah, I think that's it. There might be some more, but that's kind of it,
Because what I think, because I feel that's really at the heart of everything, and what I feel a lot of people end up getting wrong in the undertow of all of the bad portrayals is, it's what happens when it's done well. People can notice when this stuff is done well, but the thing is, the best kind of representation, unironically enough, is the kind of representation that sometimes sometimes the type that you don't end up seeing yourself. Sometimes. I don't particularly like that type of mindset myself, but sometimes it does work in some subtle way. Like, sometimes the best way to understand how a trans person lives is for you to speak to one yourself. But you might not necessarily meet a trans person in your life or in an area that you're in. You might not get that experience like I do. However, sometimes going into like a fighting game like Guilty Gear, where Bridget is a thing, or watching a show where you have a trans main character, yeah, sometimes when you see these characters for who they are, just behaving like a regular human being, you're going to find that they're not so different from you. There was a quote that I saw before coming into this. The easiest way to justify dehumanizing other people is when you start seeing people as things.
Yeah.
And this is kind of why this subject gets so difficult to navigate, because when you have all of these titles, all of these different names, all this word soup, depending on who you ask, people end up seeing
from everyone else, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what you end up having is an awkward situation of these ideas and concepts starts to become things, and when you start to attribute only things to people, you don't see them as human beings anymore. Like, you just see them as, well, he's a gay guy, so that's a trans guy, or that's a black guy. Well, you see, there's the issue. I mean, it's not inherent, it's not wrong to know what we are. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is, you have the bad actors who will end up seeing that, and then they will end up dehumanizing. So when we have a situation with representation kind of being in the position that it's in right now, it kind of creates this it creates this Ouroboros situation where I acknowledge how important it is, and every time I write specific characters, I want to portray them as honestly as I can, but I don't want to make you think that that's all they are. I mean, them being trans or them being gay, them being bi, it's definitely a part of their character. I don't want to we don't want to atomize people to the point where they don't have anything about themselves. Like, we don't want to do that either. But we have to be very careful on how we do it, because media, like it or not, influences how people think and feel. And if people get cynical when on this subject, it simply creates this big wall that prevents others from empathizing with people and their differences. It's genuinely harmful in that sense.
Yeah, it's easier to build walls, I think, than to break them down when it comes to certain things, because it's so much easier, I feel, to have a situation where people think, oh, I am this person and everyone else is the other. So yeah, the less of that, the better. I think one more last thing I was gonna say with regards to me, it's just kind of not too different from what you guys said. Is like with these things, because we are biased by nature, it's inevitable. We're never going to fully understand the perspective of someone else is different than us, and that goes for everyone. Even my own family, I'm never going to fully understand them. Heck, I would even go as far, you would never fully understand yourself until the day you die. You'll have the closest person you understand is yourself, but even then you'll never actually grasp 100% of yourself, absolutely. And that's kind of the charm of it. That's the reason why we think, we feel, we try to understand other people, because through that we understand ourselves. And because of that, though, when we do try to express an idea, even if we did it earnestly, we commit mistakes, and not everyone's going to agree with it, especially if you're trying to do it in an earnest way. And as long as you trying to do it in an honest, earnest way, I honestly would just say, like, embrace that journey. Don't worry about don't worry about if you honestly was trying to understand someone in an earnest way, and not everyone is on board with it, then I think that's just part of it. Not everyone's going to be, oh yeah, I agree. Well, sometimes at best most of the time it's like, I totally get what you're saying, but I disagree, and that's sometimes that's just best it's gonna be. So I think with these things as well, don't try to be honest, but don't try to measure whether you succeed or not necessarily on whether everyone agreed with it or not, because everyone's different, and no matter what, not everyone's going to agree with it. So I think that's maybe like another thing. Yeah. Cool. Is there anyone else want to any more closing thoughts?
I do have something I wanted to just say to anyone who's, especially writers, as well, we're writers. But one thing I do want to say to any writer and any advice, if you are struggling with diversity in your story, and you feel like either your story isn't diverse enough, or that you feel as though some characters you might have written are too much of a caricature, I would try to approach this in a way of how you would approach walking down your street. When you walk down the street and you walk past people from various different walks of life, ages, even if you live in a very homogenous country, you will never pass two people who feel the same, I would say when you're writing your characters and you are trying to build your world, and you don't want it to just feel like a kind of Planet of the Hat situation. If you know, if you don't know, it's basically the idea that groups of people get stereotyped into certain ideas. Like, everyone's watching an isekai where there's one country that's basically Japan, but not quite in the isekai world. It's that notion. Anyway, so if you're worried about falling into pitfalls like that, one thing I would say to you is this. When you see someone, you will always stereotype them based on how they look. This is just how the human brain works. It's how we survive. And I'm not going to sit there and tell you whether or not it's a good thing. I'm just going to tell you it's natural. When we stereotype things, there are always certain connotations and things that you'll get from your various upbringings and where your biases come from. It's fine. It's normal. Now I will tell you this. When you look at your characters and you look at people, you have to remember that these people exist outside of the scope of what you're creating and what you see. When I walk past a person on the street, maybe I'll think they're an asshole. Maybe I think they're a bit annoying. Well, at the same time, that person has a life that is equally as complex as my own. I don't need to know their intricacies of their lives. I don't need to understand what makes them so different from me, but I can see the difference. I can appreciate the difference, and a comment doesn't need to be made. When someone walks past you on the street, they do not come up to you and go, "Oh, by the way, I have like 6 piercings. By the way, I'm like black. By the way, this is my religion." No one does that.
By the
Why would you have your
way,
characters
Al,
do that?
by the way, Don, did you know I have a massive collection of Twilight books? Would you like to see for yourself? Oh, that's
Like,
a totally fun
yeah,
fact
show
about
me
me.
your Twilight books. But literally,
Just go
who
for the
does
whole
that?
backstory
No
and
one does
everything.
that. Exactly. No one does that, okay? In any world, no one does this. People do not interact like this. Diversity is not made by what people say, it's what people do and it's how people exist. My existence is not a political statement. Don't make it one. When you are writing a character, you do not have your character who is a minority come start teaching and preaching and screaming and telling everyone about how hard life is as a minority. People don't exist like that. I have never in my life existed as someone born to lecture those who don't look like me. And black characters shouldn't do that. White characters shouldn't do that. Asian characters shouldn't do that. And no characters should do that. Because people, existences don't exist to do this stuff. If you want to write a character who is different from yourself, and you want that character to make jabs about their identity, I would implore you to see how people who actually are that identity make jabs about themselves. And then after you've done that, maybe have someone who fits into that identity group have a look over what you've written. I know it might seem very tedious to be getting approval from people, but you write for approval. And I know that sounds like really pretentious to say, but it's true. No one writes for themselves. Sure, it's nice to write a story, but if no one's going to read it, it might as well never existed. You write for approval. And that's fine. In fact, if anything, it's a good thing. It's a way to improve. That's how you get better. But I would say this. When you're writing characters, you don't know if you've written this diversity person well, because clearly you're inserting someone for a diversity if you're writing in a particular way. But anyway, if you feel like someone is a stereotype, one, consider how they come across. Do they come across as a stereotype? If they do, are you going to do something with that? You can subvert it. You don't have to have a character who comes across as a stereotype actually be a stereotype. And if you are going to make that person a stereotype, why don't you make it so that they change, so that they become less of one? There are things you can do. As writers, we have an infinite amount of options with what we do with the building blocks that we have in our worlds. If you are going to try and create diversity, you should do something with it. Diversity does not exist without reason. There are a reason why so many of us human beings have completely different experiences. There are a reason why there's so many of us in the same umbrellas, and yet some of us never intersect. It is interesting. There's so much to do with it. Don't look at diversity as something as a quota. It is not a quota, it is reality. Just as the same way as you write male or female characters, you should also give that respect to any other minority identity, or hell, even majority identity. I don't want your characters coming in to lecture me about who they are, or what they are, or how they're so revolutionary, because this person isn't usually the type of person to do this. Which is part of the reason why I kept shitting on Miss Marvel earlier, if you were wondering. Because there's a line where it goes, the brown girl isn't usually the one saving the world. I don't want to hear that from your stories. Guess what? Newsflash, no one else does. We don't care about what your character thinks about their identity unless you're going to do something with it. Do not turn around and have your characters do things and challenge identities and ask questions if you're not going to do anything about it, because that is incredibly condescending to your audience and you're also wasting time. You have diversity as a tool because this is a tool that humanity has given you on virtue of existing. Take use of it, take note of it, look at it around you. If you're in a homogenous society, there's the internet. How many people on forums look different to you that you don't know about? Anonymous forums are filled with different people. Take a look at your resources. Consider why it is so awesome to have diversity. Imagine if everyone thought like you. Would the world not be boring? It would. Exactly. Take advantage. Use your tools. Speak to people if you don't know how their experiences are. If you want to do that, that is.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, consider this. Does your depiction of a certain type of person feel like a person who could exist? If not, reconsider. Just use your tools at your disposal. It is so great that we have this diversity nowadays. It is so great that we can have these dialogues. Please listen to people when they're speaking, because there is so much you can net from it without realizing. I have written characters who I thought were really cool until I spoke to people about them, and I was like, holy shit, I thought this was cool. Now I can make it even cooler. Speak to people. You'll be amazed how much you can glean from someone through one conversation.
Which is why
And
we have
what you
this
can glean
podcast.
from someone.
Mm.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
what you can glean from someone can improve your experiences. From speaking to these guys, I've changed aspects of my stories and I've decided to change things for the better. And I'm so glad I did. Please do the same. Even if you're just listening, please do the same. Trust me, it's going to benefit you so much. So yeah, that's all I'd say.
That's a very good point. Yeah, like yeah, pretty much definitely agree with that.
It's
Like, 'cause
another thing I wanted to mention was go on.
no, I was quick. Thing I was to say, like, yeah, I think I might have said this before, but I just feel like the reason why we're all different race and different from different backgrounds is so we can actually be curious and learn from each other. So yeah, why not actually do that instead of trying to give answers? I think what I can listen to this is, it felt like some of the bad examples is almost like the writer trying to give you answers of how things should be or how things are, instead of actually trying to answer questions to themselves about why, about like how and why and what is it like to be so like a different different race or different color or different ethnicity and stuff. But yeah, that's my take.
One thing I wanted to mention was that when it comes to like diversity, sometimes you have to be also very how do you describe it? It's like you have to be like cautious. I'm not going too stereotypical, but then there's also a case where you have to be cautious not to go so you describe it, not to go so vague to the point it's like interchangeably vague and has no like characteristics to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
What I'm
there
trying to
is there is no point of it kind of being there, because you're not really using that diversity for anything
exactly
other than just it being there for the
because
sake of being there.
yeah, because it's kind of like when if you're being like vague about something or like you're not describing something fully, it is about like having a diverse brand of characters. It comes with a lot of things, which is the way they talk, the way they look, act, the way they speak, their tone of voice, you know, their eye color, their hair color, their skin tone. All of these things are very important things. Sometimes people kind of try to blend all of this into one to make it seem like, oh, look, it doesn't matter like if this person is different to you. It's like, well, in a case you're not wrong. At the same time, you made it blend in so much that it almost feels unrealistic. It makes sense because yeah, and it's just that because like a lot of the times, because like it comes to like companies with these large companies, they kind of in some cases tend to act very predictably. And what I mean by that is that they tend to pander to a small audience, and like a demographic, whatever it may be, a different ethnicity, a different sexual orientation, or whatever. The reason why they do that is because it is the most safest way of promoting your brand to a much more larger audience. Because, well, in a sense, you already have a demographic, a standard demographic that works for everyone. You also want to include a much more diverse demographic to expand your sort of promotional material to even different brands. So you would include other different, LGBT, like whatever, include all of them into this mash pit of things that look safe and seem acceptable, and therefore, it would work because it would market well because they're safe.
Mm.
And what if something happened that it turned out not to be safe? And then you're left with the question of, was it even a good idea to like intervene with these? Or what if the case is you're pandering so much to the point you are being so obvious about it,
Mm.
And the way to describe this is kind of like, as a lot of people mentioned, it's very insincere when companies do that. I think they should be indifferent about what they promote or what they, sell to people. Right? Obviously, you want to like promote your stuff to the right people, but when you're trying to like pander everyone, when you're trying to relate to everyone, and in the end, you kind of just like end up making sort of like it also, in a sense, you're kind of
You're trying to
also
make it something for
excluding
no one
people.
because trying to make it for everyone, you end up making something for no one if you go too far that way.
Pretty much, yeah, kind of like that. It's not really such a big brainer to achieve, a very like, just sell your brand. That's all you need to do. Just sell your brand. There's nothing really you need to do. You need to pander to a group. You don't need to like, promote some sort of thing, because in the end, you're just gonna take that stuff and throw it out the window because you didn't really care about it in the first place. And what I mean by the predictability about this is that companies function in a very systematic way, and that everything is being done in a sense of purpose of gaining the most profit.
Sort of thing,
Yeah, whatever you do, whatever the case is, it's only for the sake of profit, and that is a very systematic, in my opinion, and also very dangerous mindset, that you're creating this sort of very very uncaring, uninterested, almost sort of self-consuming system that sort of doesn't really serve only for you, but not for the people you're claiming it's supposed to serve, if that makes sense. Because the only reason you're doing this is because you want that profit margin. And it's not because of the fact that you actually believe what you say, right?
Yeah. We touched upon. I think we touched upon quite a good bit of this a little earlier, where it's kind of like where they have.
It's just that, because like the thing is about companies, they're kind of like indifferent. The thing is about companies, when they promote something or like when they do, they have to be indifferent about things, because things tend to change.
Yeah.
Politics tend to change. Life tends to change, and they have to adapt to that change. One day they will do this, and the next day they will do something else because it's no longer profitable. And it's like a system. It functions very predictably, and this is good. They will go with that.
Yeah.
So
that is their strength. But when it comes to stuff like this, like certain like these subject matters that we're speaking about, when they apply that sort of mindset to I guess to a system that's it's obviously done them well. I mean, they make money, so I can't I'm not.
Well, it's also like when they try to like relate, and they post memes. They suddenly start doing memes all of a sudden. Because they're trying to relate to you, but then the memes are kind of like so
out of touch.
Out of touch, and so like obvious. It's kind of like becomes almost insulting. Because they are trying, because why they do that. That's kind of like the thing. And what else? The thing about like, as Water mentioned about Genshin, and about like having characters that don't have like that and that, and it's because another thing that to mention that the developers, Hoyoverse, is a Chinese company after all, and China is in a very weird spot about like, in terms of, what do you call it, in terms of like different minorities, to put it that way, and it's almost in the sense that they kind of care, nor they want to care. And well, in the same time, they actually operate in Africa, but there is definitely a discrimination when it comes to like people of a different skin tone in China. Usually, it's a
true.
very not nice,
Mm,
not very not nice portrayal, to put it that. I've
mm,
seen like some of
yeah.
the stuff that
They,
they
they,
put
I think
out
China,
there.
China can be cold to outsiders too, but I'm not sure. Like, I'm
Mm,
not as versed with China compared to Japan in how they approach it. From what I understand, it's probably a bit more openly cold compared to Japan, where Japan's probably a bit more just like we just want to do most times we just don't want to deal with you. Where in China they could be a bit more, I guess, open about that.
mm.
More
There's just the
most
thing
enemies.
about it is that it comes down to really like culture.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to culture and their purpose and their obviously market. Because again, as I mentioned, HoYoverse is a Chinese company, and the majority of people that actually play HoYoverse's games are Chinese.
Mm,
So you will get that discrimination or that discrimination, to put it that way. It's more like distinct difference in their culture is because that is the culture that they were born in, that
mm.
sort of environment that they're used to,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
true.
so yeah, that's basically really to like put it. It comes down to like when people like complain these things about like it's not being so inclusive and whatnot. And, HoYoverse is a Chinese company. It is a Chinese organization located in China, mainland China, and
Mm,
their main demographic is a Chinese-based audience or an Asian-based audience, to be more specific.
mm,
And most people don't describe. There aren't really any like you know, people in in Asian countries that come from like Africa or like from Middle East or like wherever or like from because they're not used to that. That is not something that they are, focused on. That is not something that they, you know, sort of like have a strong connection to it. The reason why you would see in a lot of animes that a lot of animes tend to focus around like what do you call it? A lot of animes tend to focus around the Japanese school system or the Japanese way
mm,
of life, Japanese sort of style, or like Japanese cities, Japanese culture, Japanese like school system, how they go to school, how they dress, how they behave, how they talk. This is part of their culture. This is how they, you this is how they think. This is how this is their sort of understanding of their
mm,
of like the demographic that they're targeting towards. So obviously they're gonna be like that because that is the demographic that they target. Obviously, it's a bonus to have enough on other. Obviously, it's a bonus for them to have different demographic from across a different part of the world. Like let's say like Europe or whichever. Um, but the majority of them mostly focus on their culture and on their sort
mm.
of
Yeah,
way of
S-
life
kind
and
of.
system.
Yeah, the media kind of take cater towards the people like around them for the most part. So yeah, and it's inspired
Mm,
by their own surroundings, and they're usually more inclusive in general. So
yeah.
yeah, it kind of happens that
So
way. Yeah. Um.
s- So I wanted to chime in on that for a second. So like No mentions, and there's kind of a central theme that I've kind of noticed that we've had since we started the conversation. And Echoes brought it up when she joined too.
Hmm.
What I'm noticing is that we come back around to a specific entity every time we go into the conversation. We talk about companies, we talk about the media, we talk about the big conglomerates. And like I mentioned in my statements earlier, the media, like it or not, influences the minds, thoughts, and feelings
Mm,
of everyone who happens to be looking in. It is a mirror of our thoughts, our innermost thoughts, and everything. But the problem is that those perceptions get warped, and because of those warped perceptions, this is why we're having the conversation that we're having right now. So what I really wanted to focus on mostly is we can't really let the bad behavior or the questionable portrayals take away from the individual attempts that we see that we see from artists, authors, and anyone really. Like Don mentioned, the best people can really do is to try to look at it maybe like as you're looking at somebody from the street, and that individualized perspective from this is probably going to be the best thing that we can do for ourselves on the topic. I mean, yeah, I guess you could argue that maybe it might be a little bit insular to see things like that, but the thing is, like Echoes mentioned, the mangaka behind Witch Hat Atelier has a very vested interest within portraying different walks of life within her manga. And it's not necessarily there for the sake of it or just to pander or to get the highest bill. It's mainly because their influence and their sense of empathy for other people outside of her borders is so potent to the point where they want to portray different walks of life and different styles within their work. If anything, isn't that what's one of the reasons why Chainsaw Man is such an international hit? It is so fundamentally steeped within the cinema of what inspired it, to the point where you could argue that Chainsaw Man is very much a celebration of Western cinema if you really wanted to. So is Cowboy Bebop. So is so many others. Sometimes the individual wants and the individual cares of the person behind the story, is that not a clear aren't those examples not clear reasons why representation and diversity really hits people as hard as it does? Like, whenever you will talk about Cowboy Bebop, the first thing most people will tell you is they are very much into the directorial styles of every individual episode. Sometimes some episodes are based on like Western horror. Some of them are based on the Wild West in general. Or you'll get a case where some episodes may feel like a soap opera. It's because of this focus and fundamental attraction to these different walks of life that end up influencing our work in some shape or form. So even with the bad handling of the subject, I feel the individual cases of different writers from different walks of life and different places on the globe, they actively are living proof as to why this subject has the merit that it does. And I feel as though that's very much why we get frustrated at this. But the difference with us, though, not just us, but the people who see this for what it's worth, we're able to see it because we know what it's capable of doing. And it's why we're always a cut above the bad actors. It's because they get so steeped in the negativity of the failure from these media conglomerates that they simply will not see the merit, or they simply refuse to. That might happen because they were burned one time too many, or because maybe they were always racist to begin with. I don't know. But I won't really take that displeasure away from people. But at the same time, I feel that we shouldn't forget the individual examples. Well, not even just individual examples like I've just been hammering on, but just the fact that there is proof that this push for it, this care for it, there's precedent for why we should care and why we do care. Like, it's in all the positive examples we've discussed so far. And at the back of all of our minds, even as we mention the negativity, we've seen it done better before. And we know it's been done better. We know how it works at the end of the day. All right, Don, I pass the torch to you.
Okay, so one thing I figured what you were going to mention, so I just wanted to bridge onto that. One thing I do want to say to anyone who's listening to this, diversity doesn't need justification. When I say this, I mean as in, let's say you're writing a story and you want to have a main character and they go to like some school or something, right? I don't care who's in your school. You don't need to justify it to me. I need no justification as to why you have a character who is a minority or not. And I believe that in the past, I actually gave the complete contrary advice to this. When I was younger, I was like, no, there needs to be a justification for why this person is this or that or this. If you can hit someone with they need to justify why a character is, a girl or light skinned or whatever, if you're asking that question, I want you to answer this question for me. Why shouldn't she be? Why shouldn't he be? Because the thing is, we have gotten so used to in media. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, whatever that majority race in that country is, and the male of that person is considered the default in any media of whatever you're watching. If you are in Nigeria, a Nigerian man is considered the standard main character. It's just how it is. And the thing is that we have gotten so used to the idea of a certain main character usually being a guy, not to shit on anyone who's a guy here, but I'm just trying to say it as is. But we've gotten so used to a main character who is a male being in a certain place that we consider that the default. And we've gotten to this point where people have gotten so used to this default setting that they hear any deviation from it and they immediately assume it's pandering. They immediately assume it's woke. It's not. Other people exist. People are allowed to write about their experiences, or hell, the experiences of others who do not reflect the so-called default setting, and they need no justification. People do not have to justify every single choice they make. And I know that this is something that might run contrary to a lot of advice you hear, and especially writing forums, the idea that you should have choices. There are certain things you don't need to justify. Your main character's appearance and stuff doesn't need to be justified in your universe in terms of why they exist, unless it is a plot point.
Yeah.
I have a main character in my world, right? She appears a certain way. She is not who she appears to be, in more ways than one. That main character being someone who doesn't appear to that was a choice I made. Did I justify it into story? Yes, I did, because it's story relevant. But in reality, if I'm writing a story and I decide to make my main character fat, I need no justification for that. I shouldn't have to tell my audience, oh, by the way, she's fat because of this. Because you never expect John Wick to turn around and go, oh, by the way, I'm a white muscular guy who's like really good at being a hitman because of this. That's not what we're here for. We're here to experience the story. When you write diversity in your stories, you don't need to justify this stuff. If you want to make everyone fat in your story, you're fucking free to do that shit. If you want to do it, that's your prerogative. But you don't have to justify it to your audience. Because when you start having to constantly justify and constantly go, oh, but I have a reason for this, or oh, I need to have a reason for this, that's when you start taking away your own agency as a creative. Half of the appeal of being able to write a story is being able to choose stuff yourself, and that you don't have to have someone to answer to all the time. If you feel like you constantly have to answer to your audience, you're not writing a story for you or your audience anymore. You're writing a story to appease people, not for feedback.
True.
And yeah, everyone wants to hear good feedback for their story. Of course you do. But if you can never put your foot down, you're not writing your own story anymore.
Yeah.
You're writing a story that someone else wants from you.
And
All I'll
that
say is
has
like,
that has
the
its
main
own
reason why I'm
issues.
just being yeah, it does have its own issues because if you're constantly like that's pandering. Writing for someone else and constantly doing what they want because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, that's pandering.
Mm.
It is not pandering to have a character who looks different from the so-called norm of your country or the norm of your region. It's pandering to do what other people always want you to do because you feel like any differentiation would hurt someone else's feelings. That's pandering.
And then we're back around to the same problem. Like,
Exactly. So what I would say, this is definitely the Ouroboros thing that we were speaking about earlier. Like Kite was saying this because it's true. There is a self-fulfilling prophecy with this sort of diversity speak, because I talk about diversity from a point of view of someone who turns around and I write whatever the fuck I want. I will have no one tell me that I can't have a main character who looks my certain way. I will choose whatever the fuck I want, and that's my prerogative.
It's like
If I decide to
everybody
listen to what someone else says, that's my choice. At the end of the day, then, if I
mean, it's
choose
like-
to pander to someone, that's my choice. I can't complain about me pandering when I'm the one doing it. If people want to read my story and they think I'm pandering to an audience because I want them to look a certain way, that's just how it is. if I feel the need to pander to them by proving I'm not pandering, I'm wasting my own time and I'm fulfilling the prophecy again.
Yeah.
Don't fall into this pitfall. Write what you want. Look at the characters you do. Please write your characters to feel like actual characters and not stereotypes. And you'll probably have this shit sorted. Honestly, just try not to listen to people who turn around and believe that things are pandering if you write someone who isn't the norm of their culture. Yeah, most of the people are usually not acting in good faith anyway.
Yeah.
And they're usually the types of people who don't actually consume stories for enjoyment, but consume stories for outrage. And trust me, you can tell.
You can tell.
Like think like I don't want to name drop anyone, but the quartering people like that.
Oh
yes,
God!
yeah. If you know, you know. But he's the sort of person who does this shit. He's the type of person who will watch a Marvel show, knows he won't like it from the trailer alone, watches it, farms outrage, and then turns around and calls it pandering garbage.
It is absolutely pandering garbage. It is.
While it is pandering garbage, he will also reply that same criticism to things that aren't. He'll probably go and look at something like Moonlight and call it pandering garbage.
Yeah.
Like,
Who is this?
He's pretty dishonest. He's a YouTuber. He is let's call him a political commentator for kindness' sake. But he's someone who believes. He likes to talk out of his arse a lot, and he's one of those kind of outrage farming YouTubers. But he talks a lot about this sort of thing, especially media, and the way he speaks about it. He views media in a way that is very uncritical at times. There are things that he has to say that are obviously right, because, you know, broken clock. But at the same time, a lot of shit he says is just like...
Because a lot of it
Did you actually watch the thing, or did you watch the trailer and then form your entire judgment on it?
That's basically what it is with him. Like, if I could just to kind of add to your point for a bit, I used to run in that crowd for a long time, so I know exactly who you're talking about. The thing is, they're basically the people that I have been mentioning, like the people that get so far deep into being anti. I've been trying to avoid saying the word up till now, but I might as well.
Anti-SJW.
Yeah, anti-SJW or anti-woke. They're so far gone into that sphere of thinking to the point where they have become what we call anti-fans. They have no love or passion for any of the things that they talk about. They're simply so knee-deep into the catharsis of anger and negativity that there is nothing left called meaningful passion. It is only a grift that satisfies their need to get by more than anything else. So what you end up having now is a situation of everyone can work as hard as they can to produce the meaningful results that we're talking about, but it will never matter because their bias has gotten so knee deep that they will never see anything. Yeah, it's all they see.
Like, these people are literally unappeasable. You will never make them happy. And you know what? It's fine. Because it's more important that you make yourself happy and the audience you care more about happy than the people who will constantly grift for money. Honest to God. Because I also used to kind of, I wouldn't say I ran in these crowds, but let's just say 2016 was a very dark time.
Very much so.
If you know, you know. But like, YouTube was a very different place back then. And it was very easy to find like these sorts of people because they were very popular back then. And a big reason why they were popular is because of the whole Gamergate, anti-SJW fiasco shit that was all running at the same time. But anyway, let's not get into that because that's a lot. But long story short, there are a lot of people who are like those people who will act in bad faith and consume stories and will see any representation. You could write the best in the world. You could literally write a character as striking and as, you know, completely awe-inspiring, fucking Thorfinn from Vinland Saga, and they will find something about his character. They'll be like, "Oh, he's blonde hair. This is just pandering garbage." There are people who will do that. I will always tell you this: genuine, honest to God, you can pretty much always distinguish these people. Don't internalize what they say. Ignore them. They have nothing useful to add to anything. They will eventually realize, but trust me, they have nothing meaningful to add to the conversation. They'll be very frustrating, but it's fine.
The irony is that even though we spent most of our time, like, we've talked about the merits, but we've also talked about the negatives. But the thing is, we're not so steeped in one direction or the other. We simply treat it like it is. The problem is when you're so far gone into one specific mode of thinking that this subject becomes near impossible to reconcile, when it's a lot easier to do than you think. It really is a lot easier to reconcile than most people realize. So when you have those bad actors just kind of stinking up the place with the negativity, it's easy to see why some people might not like this subject or they don't like to touch it. In fact, when Echoes brought it up as a topic, I already had a lot of faith that we were gonna do fine. But there's always something at the back of my head that makes me terrified of this topic.
Yeah, it is a very touchy topic, and yeah, even when I knew it would be interesting, but at the same time, it was at the back of my mind. But I just had faith that would have a dialogue, because I think that's with anything. I mean, this is probably slightly off topic, but if anything, to have a dialogue about it, even if you don't see it the same way, is the way to go. The problem with most people, they're just talking in their own chambers, and straw man argument the other point, not even trying to not actually listening, or they've gone past the point of listening, where they see everything that people are saying, they're shaping it in their own narrative. So yeah, it is a touchy topic, but yeah, I think because we're listening and actually having a conversation about it, I've had faith. So yeah,
I did want to mention it's if somebody asks me the question of why my characters are the way they are, my honest answer would be, well, I mean, if you really want to know why the characters are the way they are, you can read the story.
Base.
You know, if you want to know, or if you want the short answer, because I thought it was cool.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Oh my gosh, yeah, honestly.
Valid.
Literally, rule of cool is the way to rule the world.
That's it.
Yeah.
That should be enough.
That's literally.
Literally.
No, that is.
Oh my god.
That was so freaking big. Oh my god.
I mean, in most of the case, that really is the case, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Like,
no, but it's true. It's true.
Anything you start with, you have an interest in it, and because you have an interest in it, it's because you find it cool or interesting. Then maybe you get into the deeper things of why. But it always starts with, oh, this is pretty cool. So yeah, it's simple. But yeah,
literally. Like, I saw this thing that you literally just reminded me of one of my favorite threads on world building ever, where someone was talking about the difference between hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi. And someone was like, "Oh my god, you do know that mechas would be so ineffective? Like tanks would be infinitely better." And then the top comment was literally, "Don't care, giant robot."
Exactly.
I'm sorry. I can't hear you over the sound of understanding the light of the human heart, my guy.
Literally, like, bro, are you telling me you wouldn't want to pilot a giant robot? Like, bro, you're missing out.
Yeah,
I can't hear you over the sound of my Gundam Unicorn NTD and possibilities, man.
It's like I hear you, but what if? That's it. Like that's it. That's all I want to do. But yeah, it's interesting. There is maybe I'm not sure it was really a question, but I think Echoes was mentioned about like how I think the culture of Japan and how they portray stuff. And like there is a few exceptions, I think, with I think the lady who made the manga was like one of the exceptions, and it just made me think like, yeah, like wouldn't it be nicer if they were probably more open in terms of like accepting of other people? And I definitely agree. But also it makes you just be aware of like if there were to, I mean, I think over time, especially if it happens naturally and that stuff. Awesome, no issues with that. But I think at the same time there will be a difference. The media will there'll be a difference in media, and wherever that goes, it really depends. Because I think a lot of, like I said, I think with at least with Japanese and Japan, how I understand it is like they're very inclusive, and obviously their culture, like with anything, your surroundings is what creates them, inspires you, and that what helps you create the things you create. And obviously, being as I love watching anime and everything, I've grown really attached to that kind of the stuff they create. So there is a thought of they create the stuff they create because of the culture and the life they have. Now, if things were to just change like tomorrow and they were like more open, more inclusive, awesome. But then that will change the media. But how in what way, I can't say for sure. Would it be the same? I don't know. I think what I'm trying to get at is there was always a trade off for anything. When there's something changes, there's always a trade off. It's never always just going to be, oh, once that's changed, it's all going to be up, onwards and upwards. But it's all more. I guess when it comes to that, it's just a more matter of, is that change overall going to be worth it in the long run, regardless of what we lose for it. So that's like, I'm not sure if that was like a question, but that's just kind of what went across my mind. It's like, well, if that were to change, would anime still be awesome? Would I like it as much? Would it all become more, I don't know, more the same as other stuff I've seen in other, like, I guess in the West, where I haven't been as interested in the media there. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. If they have any thoughts on that, then you can express them. But that's just kind of like that came across to me.
Did I?
Man, this was long.
Yeah, it's been long today.
Yeah.
Can I answer this one though? So in terms of what you were saying about the idea of like basically if anime and like Japanese media was more diverse, I'd honestly say that diversity probably wouldn't hurt Japanese media nearly as much as people think it would.
Because it already is.
And there's one very simple.
No, yeah,
I mean that as well, but also there's one very, very, very simple reason as to why. So there's like this one proverb that I'm sure you've all heard. I'll read it out in English first and then I'll say it in Japanese after. The idea of, the nail that sticks out gets hammered back in. This is a very fundamental tenet of, like just Japanese culture and how much it values the idea of order, respect, and just uniformity. Japanese culture loves that, and there's several reasons for it, but it's because a lot of their own tenets, both in religious tenets like Buddhism, for example, also Taoism, stuff like that. There are certain things that exist within Japanese culture that will make it more, I don't want to say resilient, but resilient to change. And a lot of people are so afraid of change and often shun the idea of like, opening of culture and opening of ideas, mainly because they don't understand how cultures manage to preserve themselves. Like when we say that, when we say that a culture is changing or there is a change in cultural attitudes, people often prescribe these things to things like immigration and, new people, new demographics, stuff like that. And the idea that, oh, they're changing everything that we used to love. But in reality, this is happening all the time. Half of the media we enjoy nowadays would never have been possible without half of the stuff that's happened. A lot of the things that we talk about, we really like in anime. A lot of anime has been influenced by pop culture. And what is pop culture molded by? Well, culture. In the West, in the East as well.
Please,
How much?
please look at the 80s.
Just like you were mentioning earlier, like with Chainsaw Man and being influenced by Western movies, by Hollywood movies. Do you think Chainsaw Man would exist without the West?
And how about this?
I think it's very frustrating when people act like Japan is this like very special island that is in complete isolation from the rest of the world that has all these insanely individualistic ideas. When in reality, it's a culture that operates just like every other culture in the fact that it hears stuff from the outside and it takes in things it likes and it spews out things it dislikes.
I mean, look at Bubblegum Crisis. Look at Bubblegum Crisis and Eureka 7. Those are living proof that they have been influenced by the music scene and the cinema scene of the West. It's proof. It's just,
but this is what I mean. Half of the things that you like about anime now, when I say you, I didn't mean you specifically, by the way, I just want to say. But half of the things that people like about anime now And when they're like, oh, all of this woke Western culture is coming into my anime, the thing is, it's like, your anime exists partially because of Western culture as well. These things
Yeah.
influence each other. It's almost weird how much these things amalgamate to create the thing you like.
Yeah.
But because you're so used to seeing it with a specific
I swear,
label,
if I'm correct,
you ascribe that one label to it, and you don't see it outside of that isolation.
Yeah. Actually, no, yeah, because because I swear Disney came first, then anime, manga, if I'm correct. Because Astro Boy was one of the first anime that came out, right? And I think was Disney around before then?
Yeah, I think Disney's a bit older than Astro Boy. I think Disney's
Yeah.
around the
Oh yeah.
30s.
No. Astro Boy came as a result of Disney. Tezuka was
that's what I wanted to
heavily
just make
influenced
sure
by
I did
Disney.
get that correct. Yeah.
No, but that's what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And the entire of the anime world has stemmed from half of this stuff. That's why part of the reason why I hate it when people talk about. I hate it when X culture or X thing is infiltrating this group. And I don't even mean it from a gatekeeping point of view. I just mean it from a history point of view. This is so obviously wrong. People talking about, I don't know if you've seen it online before, but people on Twitter talking about how people who don't look a certain way shouldn't be able to cosplay. Stuff like that.
That's crazy.
It's like, how do you so fundamentally misunderstand so many very obvious concepts? Half of the appeal of cosplay is that anyone could do it. That's the point. That's the whole point. Half of the reason why anime is how it is now, the way you like it. You could talk about how much you love Shield Hero or Made in Abyss or all of these amazing anime. Okay, maybe not amazing for Shield Hero, but anyway. But you can talk about how much you love all of these anime. Half of the staff, in fact, not even half, usually a bit more than half of the staff who made the show are Japanese. Whoop-de-doo. You know why? Because they all come from different cultures and they work together to create something great. I remember hearing, so during this era, sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but I promise it's related. During the 2016 kind of era of really edgy YouTube and shit like that, there was this thing where these guys used to talk about cultures being like paint. I don't know if anyone's heard this analogy before.
Eh?
Paint, okay.
Oh,
you probably
mean
haven't.
10 different colors for 10 different people?
No. I'll explain. So the idea is that different countries' cultures or different regions' cultures are like a different color of paint, and that this is basically supposed to be an argument against multiculturalism. The idea that if you mix all of these paint colors together, you get rid of the beautiful, vibrant blues and the lovely yellows, and it all becomes this ugly brown.
Oh my god, the dog whistling of that is so bad.
Yeah, trust me, you can. It's very blatant, but this used to be a really big talking point on some of the sides. But I remember sitting there, and even when I was younger, thinking this is ridiculous because the thing is, culture isn't remotely like paint. It is something that we exchange simply by talking to each other. Half of the reason why modern day culture is how it is because of the way that our ancestors used to interact with each other, whether that was through invasion, colonization, war, or even just diplomacy. There were all sorts of reasons why culture has turned into what it is today in every single region on this planet. So when people act like cultures are these things to be protected, they are fundamentally misunderstanding how culture works. Culture survives in its people. That's how it thrives. That's how it spreads. And that when we talk about, our cultures and representing cultures, the best way to learn it, the best way to do it is through its people and through its language also. But people, language, culture, that's how you understand them together. You can't understand these things in isolation because they don't make sense. You can't start learning Chinese and expect to understand any nuances of the language if you don't know about anything about the culture. Trust me, I've tried it. Bad idea. Very bad idea. Does not work. But the thing is that a lot of the times when people talk about things being pandering and woke and all of these things, a big part of it comes from the fact that they're often afraid of change because they don't understand how change is instituted. I'm not saying that all change is good because I don't believe that. I mean, obviously not. But change, if Japan, let's say, were to change, and let's say that 1% more of the Japanese population was like immigrants, I promise you, Japan is not going to fall apart. Anime isn't suddenly going to be the exact same as the MCU. It doesn't work like that.
No,
Culture
yeah,
has
don't happen.
never worked
Yeah.
like that. And it's also notoriously hard to get into Japan as an immigrant anyway.
Mm.
But let's ignore that for now. It's just the idea that culture is something that is perpetuated by its people. A people's culture will never be lost as long as there are people who practice it. You know?
Yeah.
That's
And
part of the
and
reason
Japan,
why
yeah.
certain
And-
things are very tragic.
Oh,
Yeah. and
Sorry,
Japan-
were you saying something?
I'm probably gonna have to step out for now. It's about time for me to get ready for a trip, but I do want to mention,
Enjoy.
I do want to mention this was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be.
I told
Yeah,
you.
this
I
is
told you
fun,
this would be a
honestly.
long one.
This has been a
Yeah.
deep one. Yeah.
Yeah, and Echoes, I want to say, I want to give you my most heartfelt thanks because this was amazing, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm glad to. I think I didn't say much, but it's mostly because everyone else had such good points. I didn't feel a need to add anything, but I think everyone did a good job.
Like everyone here is exceptionally based. Like, if I could sound like a zoomer for a minute, everyone's takes was just genuinely enthralling, and it just goes to show that this topic is genuinely one of the more fascinating ones out there, and it doesn't have to just boil down to like to Twitter spats or Twitter convos. This is really a very human conversation, and
Yeah.
it is totally worth having, no matter what sphere you're on.
Okay. All right, guys. So this has been another episode of the Lounge Podcast. Yeah, guys. Honestly, this is fantastic talk today. I already felt like this topic was really like deep and it can go in like a lot of ways. But yeah, even in that expectation, you kind of blew it. So thank you. Honestly, give yourself a round of applause. But yeah, also, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, this is Lounge Podcast, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye.
I'll see you badasses later.